Hello and welcome to my channel. Vice Rhino here. I've got with me Erik Manning, right over there. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and why we're here?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a Christian apologetics YouTuber, so stepping into the enemy territory here. And so, no, I'm just kidding. But no, I run the channel Testify, or just handle as Testify Apologetics, and been doing that for a little over a couple of years now. Mostly focusing on defending the reliability of the Gospels, the historical side of things, as well as the argument for miracles. And you had made a kind of a half-hour response to Deflate that
Yeah.
I did a little response to, and you were kind enough to leave me a thoughtful comment there, and we just kind of started talking, and yeah, just thought we'd have a conversation. It just kind of makes things easier than just talking past each other with endless back and forth responses and things like that.
Yeah, and so we're doing this to raise money for charity. This kind of happened at a good time because I saw your response video to me, and you're like, "Hey, why don't we like have a stream and hash this out?" I'm like, "Great! I'm raising money for charity in November." So
Yeah.
let I'll just talk a little bit about that. I'm raising money for Project Share, which they're a great charity in the Niagara region. I always do this for it's local to where I am, because like I don't know, like you can, the big international charities, they generally do okay for themselves. I like to give to smaller local charities as well. So they help people in need in the Niagara region. They have 17 programs that individuals and families can access, which include things like support with utility payments, emergency prescription funding, free school supplies for kids. They have a food bank. They run community gardens, and more. There's a lot more than that. Let's see, I have some numbers written down. So 16% of families live below the poverty line in Niagara. 34% of the clients of Project Share are children and teenagers. 13% of them are seniors. And they got close to 1 million pounds of food provided last year. So they do a lot of good in the community. And also last year, when they released their financial statement, through third-party fundraising, they raised about $53,000. We raised 12,000 of that. So I'm very proud to be part of a community that raised almost a quarter of their entire funding for the year through third-party donations. So yeah, that's pretty great, and I hope you guys can keep that up. There should be a bot posting links in the chat to go there. If not, you can go to share.vicerhino.com. The link is also in the description, and yeah, share.vicerhino.com may or may not work. I've been having some issue with my my domain host setting up the forward and being consistent about that. So yeah, I'm hoping that we can get to $5,000 during this stream because we're about halfway through November, and I'd like to get to 10,000 for November. So let's get us halfway there. We've got $1,500 to raise today. So yeah, without further ado, this is kind of an unstructured. Yeah, so Zach, thank you so much for the super chat. Please do not send super chats as a donation. This charity is so small that they're not registered on YouTube's charity thing. So I will forward that $10 on to them from personal data. Like I'll add it into what I'm going to give at the end of the month. But yeah, YouTube takes their 30% cut off of super chats because this charity isn't registered with them. So yeah, don't send super chats as donations is the message there. It does say it at the bottom in a little scroll, but yeah. Anyway, this is kind of an unstructured discussion. We were trying to kind of nail down a topic, and as we were going back and forth, we just kept having the argument that we are going to have today in private emails, and it's like, why don't we just talk about whatever? So I know you are a proponent of the not the maximal facts. No, is it maximal facts? Is that what it's called? Or
Maximal facts, maximal data. Yeah. And so, by the way, I wanted to say that is one of the reasons why I jumped on board with what you're doing there, because I think the charity that you're supporting is definitely awesome. And I'm really happy to help any way that I possibly can with that. But yeah, no, I support. It's a maximal data kind of argument, which would be
Yeah.
distinguished from the minimal facts approach that would be popularized by Christian apologists like Dr. Michael Licona, Dr. Gary Habermas. I've been, if anything, I've been actually pretty critical of that particular approach. And for those in your audience who might not know, minimal facts approach basically just will only use data that is granted by a vast majority of like heterogeneous scholars. So scholars on all sides of the aisle. And those facts typically will be, Jesus died by crucifixion, that he appeared to his disciples, at least they believe that he appeared to him, and that he appeared to the apostle Paul. And they think that the best explanation of all of those facts is that, Jesus really did, in fact, rise from the dead. Well, I think anybody who just thinks for a little bit, what were those appearances like? What did they experience? Were they brief? Were they short? Yeah. Were they vague? What's going on with those appearances? Well, Paul, they're using their data mostly from the Apostle Paul and 1 Corinthians 15, the creed that's found there. But like, Paul never tells us what those experiences were like.
He
and
just said they saw them.
Yeah, so they just saw them.
I can. Go ahead. I'm sorry to drop this on you if you weren't aware already, but 2 years ago now I lost my wife. So I can say with confidence that like, if I lived in a time period where we didn't know what bereavement hallucinations were and we didn't know how common they were, there are several times when I woke up at night convinced that she was alive again, and like going through my head with how like I have to call the bank and the insurance place and like everybody that I sent her death certificate to. I now have to call them and explain why I sent a death certificate for someone who's still alive, and that's going to be a nightmare. And for a not insignificant amount of time after waking up, that's just where my brain was. And so like now I recognize that wasn't even hallucination. That was just dreaming. I did have some hallucinations as well. It was mostly audio, but visual hallucinations are common as well. And so I could easily see that if I didn't know what those things were, and I was religious and prone to believing in life after death and that people could come back from the dead, then absolutely I could see that becoming a common belief.
Yeah, I mean, I think the minimal facts person, they'll push back and say, well, that doesn't explain Paul or all the different appearances or the group appearances. But where does Paul even talk about group appearances? He talks about an appearance to the 500, but what was even that like? I think Dale Allison has made some pretty astute observations. Like, what was it? What is the receiving line? Did they go around and shake his hand? He doesn't really know. And I completely understand. I lost my mother several years ago too, and I had auditory hallucinations of her speaking and different things like that. So yeah, I think they would push back on that a little bit, but overall, just vagueness, the whole vagueness of it all, is just too, it's just not strong enough to justify that, like, overcome the low prior probability of a miracle occurring.
I know we're supposed to be arguing instead of agreeing, but what I always find interesting is that most of the people that argue the minimal facts argument are not Catholic. And yet the Catholics have the miracle of the sun, which that was a lot more than 500 people that they all saw the Virgin Mary appear. So like, how do you explain that in a way that doesn't also explain the appearance of the 500?
I mean, the funny thing, sorry, if everybody's looking for fireworks here for us agreeing too much here, but the funny thing is I've actually seen Dr. Licona in an article published on the Reasonable Faith website, which of course is William Lane Craig, the premier Christian apologist website. He let Licona publish an article where he suggested at least one of the appearances, not Fatima, but another one, and I can't remember the exact place, but regardless, he attributed it to demonic spirits, and it's like, is that really where we're going right now? We're going to pull out the demon theory? Why couldn't a Jewish person just pull out the same thing for the resurrection of Jesus? And so
that is a very common apologetic to explain religious experiences in other religions,
right? Yeah, and that's not something I would probably reach for personally. So yeah, I just thought it's a little bit strange. And so, but to further explain the maximal data approach, what we would do is, in order to justify overcoming kind of the low prior probability of a resurrection happening, you're going to need some pretty good evidence. Okay. And so we want to know what the appearances were like. And what we believe is that there are plenty of reasons to think that the Gospels authors, their relationship to the truth is something that they value, that they are close up to the facts, that they're honest, and that they're scrupulous and all of that good stuff. And so what that means is that at least the testimony that we have in the Gospels reflects the unembellished testimony of what the original eyewitnesses claimed. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that what they claimed is, true. That's just part of one step. The other step that's necessary is why would they make those particular claims to an audience that would be, less than enthusiastic about that and might even persecute them over that. And so, if what we have in the Gospels, which would be that they ate with Jesus, that they touched him, that they heard him talk, that there were group appearances, that they spent a period of 40 days with Jesus before he ascended into heaven, then if that is really what the unembellished testimony of the apostles is, then again, why would they make those claims to a hostile audience? So we would say that the best explanation is the resurrection. And so basically, it's just kind of like the trilemma. You probably have heard of like the C.S. Lewis trilemma. It's similar.
Liar, lunatic, Lord.
Yeah, we would just move it to the disciples and say, okay, well, they either were lying about it, but there's massive reasons to not bring such a story forward, or they were mistaken about it, but the kind of appearances that we see in the Gospels would be something that they would be, it would be difficult for them to be mistaken, or they were telling the truth. So
I have a question for you here. Do you believe
Sure.
that the Gospels were they were actually written by eyewitnesses?
Well, of course, we know that Mark and Luke aren't eyewitnesses. And so Justin Martyr even refers to the Gospels as being the memoirs of the apostles and those that followed him. And so I think that even though he doesn't mention Mark and Luke, it does accurately, I think, describe them. I think we have an abundance of evidence that Luke was a traveling companion of the apostle Paul. And he was in Jerusalem in Acts 21 when Paul was imprisoned and arrested, and also in Caesarea Maritima, which is 75 miles away from Jerusalem. So he would have ample opportunity to interview people who were witnesses. Mark, church history, tradition tells us
him learning from Peter in Rome.
Learning from Peter, he's that. Matthew, I would fully admit that defending Matthean authorship is a little more difficult than some of the other Gospels, but I think it definitely can be done. And then John, I think there's a very strong case that can be made that John was an eyewitness, this is not some sort of weird theological fiction story, fan fiction that he's making up. I know there are a lot of arguments to the contrary. That's a very controversial, premise, but I think that whoever wrote John is
kind of a minority position. Like most, it's pretty well accepted that John was written sometime around 95. Which
even if it's written later, I mean, it doesn't mean that somebody, as long as they're in living memory. I mean, even the church fathers say that John was urged well after the fact that the other Gospels were, and he was writing at an old age. And so as long as it's within living memory, I mean, we have Holocaust survivors who didn't write their memoirs until, the 90s and much later. And so I don't find it necessarily like totally implausible. But sure, I understand what you're saying.
And also like John does seem to go out of his way sometimes to contradict the other Gospels. Like, I know there's a lot of harmonization that goes into like some of the, well, he didn't explicitly say that that's not how it happened, but also he kind of did. Like the whole image of like Jesus carrying the cross to Golgotha and then like falling down halfway through the journey, and then Simon of Cyrene is made to finish the journey. That is kind of, because in the Synoptic Gospels, they don't mention Jesus carrying the cross. They just say Simon of Cyrene was made to carry the cross. Whereas in John, he specifically says he carried his own cross.
Sure. I mean, I don't think that necessarily makes Jesus appear to be all that much manlier.
It doesn't matter how manly it makes him appear. Like, I know that's...
Or godlier.
Because I know, I don't know if you are getting that I have this opinion from watching my videos, or if it's just
Sure.
known that it's a common opinion, but like, yeah, that is the kind of thing where John wanted Jesus to be fully God, whereas the synoptic gospels had an element of humanity with him, where like he can suffer because he's a human, whereas John is like, no, he's God, he doesn't feel pain. That's why he skipped Gethsemane, that's why he carried his own cross.
Sure. I mean, you do have John's gospel. You do have Jesus in John's gospel say, I thirst, which is like a very human expression right there on the cross that the other other gospels do not have.
Yeah, but
and so I guess I just don't
thirsting
really
and
see
suffering are two different things, though. Like,
I
being.
mean, I think that I don't think that he's up there on the cross not suffering. I mean, we don't really hear him screaming or yelling out in pain. We get my God, why have you forsaken me, which is an allusion to Psalm 22, but
and is not present in John, is it? Is that one in John?
No, it's
or
not.
I do get the stories mixed up, which one's in which book sometimes. So
there's some biblical scholars like Brant Petre who've brought to the fact that even in the Mishnah, which is a Jewish text, that one can just invoke an entire psalm by quoting the first passage of that particular psalm. Well, if you look at the rest of Psalm 22, you see kind of explicit descriptions of one who is suffering, their body is being laid to the dust of death, they've been stretched out, their arms, their body is dislocated. And then at the end of the psalm, of course, the nations begin to turn to worship the God of Israel. And so even in Mark's gospel, you kind of see this, like the Roman centurion is like, well, truly, this is the Son of God, And so, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just not quite buying the development pattern. I mean, John, he gets tired, he sits down and talks to the woman at the well. There's all kinds of human indications.
Yeah, but as far as like the my God, why have you forsaken me, invoking Psalm 20, you said Psalm 22?
Psalm 22, yeah.
But that's not what he says in John. He just says, it is finished, and then voluntarily gives up his spirit, whereas in the other ones, it seems like a much more human death.
I mean, I don't know. He's giving somebody... He's giving his mother into the care of somebody. I mean, that seems like a very human thing to do.
Yeah, but he's up there nailed to the cross giving people orders.
I don't see why you wouldn't do something like that if you were being executed. I mean, why wouldn't you care? If there's witnesses in John's gospel who are up front and close, wouldn't they be able to tell John, or if John's personally present himself there, other words? I mean, I don't think that like the only words that we have from Jesus on the cross is like what's in Mark, and then Matthew's just going to copy it, and then Luke's going to say something else.
But that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that like the portrayal of Jesus in the different books, it's a different Jesus each time, where like Matthew and Luke, it's much more similar to Mark because they're basically copying Mark for a good chunk of the story. Whereas John had his own, like the Johannine community had a completely different view of Jesus than the community that came up with the Gospel of Mark.
I see kind of a similar Jesus. I mean, he's got like this weird, snappy, sarcastic sense of humor in both Gospels. I mean, take for instance, Luke, right? There's this lady, she's bent over, she's got some sort of like, I don't know, some kind of crazy arthritis. I don't know what it was, but she was bent over, she couldn't move. And then he heals her, and then he's like, hey, you goofballs will take your donkey to get a drink of water on the Sabbath, but you're going to get mad at me for healing somebody on the Sabbath. You're mad at me for making somebody whole. Well, we see the same thing in John chapter 7, where he's like, you guys will circumcise somebody on the whatever, the 8th day, and technically you're breaking the Sabbath, but here I make a man whole on the Sabbath, and you guys are going to get ticked off at me. And I mean, that's just one example. I would not going to base my whole entire case on that, but there's multiple examples of the person. And I have a video on this that people can check out if they want to, where you see like little subtle details about the personality of Jesus that is completely consistent with the rest of the Gospels. Also, I don't necessarily buy that like John is like got this idea of like Jesus is just more God because he's the latest gospel. And if you actually read the very first few verses of Mark literally changes Isaiah and has John say, make his path straight. and he's referring to Jesus. Make way for the Lord, right? He refers to him as Lord. He has Jesus forgiving sins. In chapter 2, he calls himself the Lord of the Sabbath, and also in chapter 2, he's doing all kinds of weird, like theophany kind of things, like walking on water in Mark's gospel. And he says that the demons recognize him and says, are you going to cast us into the pit of hell forever? Like, who has authority to do that? Like, I don't know. It seems like that would be something that would be God's prerogative, forgiving sins, doing all these different things. And so I don't really buy the whole John has this much more. I mean, yeah, it's more explicit, especially in the prologue. But I think Jesus is God throughout all four gospels. I think that's pretty clear. But anyway, I could give more examples in other synoptics if you want, but yeah, I guess I just push back on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not saying that there was no divinity with Jesus. Like, the adoptionist perspective that is apparent in the book of Mark is very much like he's a human, but then God adopts him as a son, and he still has some human flaws, but like he is the son of God there, so he does have God's authority to do things like forgive sins. It doesn't mean that he didn't have any sort of God powers. It just like it portrays him as much more flawed than the book of John does.
I mean, I don't know what examples you have in mind as far as flawed.
Well, like he's much more impatient in certain ways. He doubts, like in the Garden of Gethsemane, that whole thing where like he's doubting whether or not he wants to go through with this, and he's asking God to take the cup away from him.
Which it'd be a doubt. I think that's just a human want to.
It'd be a really weird thing for him to do if he's actually God, to say, hey, me, other version of me, please don't make me do this. I mean, I'll do it if you/me really wants me to do it, but
yeah, I mean, again, he's the whole doctrine of the incarnation is he's 100% human, he's 100% God. I mean, even in the book of Hebrews, which has
is that not self-contradictory though? Like, how can you be 100% human and 100% God?
Yeah, you're talking to the wrong guy. Philosophy's my department. I'm more of a history guy. This is something that I'm going to be flat out honest. I think there's good answers for it. Joshua Sijuwati, Richard Swinburne have done a lot of works in this particular area. As far as like the doctrine of the incarnation and different things like that. Is it something that I'm really good at explaining? No, not necessarily, but I will say that Hebrews has an extremely high Christology that is just as high as John, and yet he says that he was touched with the feelings of our infirmities. He was tempted as every point, yet as we, and he said that he resisted sin up to the shedding of blood. And it's obvious that he's constantly referring to the whole Garden of Gethsemane experience. He's not explicit, but it's like, I think a lot of biblical scholars would be like, yeah, I think he's referring to the temptation scenes towards the end of the gospel. And so yet at the same time, the author of Hebrews, I would say, has a very, very similar Christology, if not the exact same as the Apostle John, or the writer of the Gospel of John. And so I guess I'm gonna do the Dillahunty and say I'm not convinced. just kidding.
Is Hebrews one of the contested epistles? Like, it's not necessarily written by Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it's anonymous. I mean, it's not, there's no contest to it. It just is, it's an anonymous epistle. And even in the early church, I think the church father Origen was like, who wrote the epistle of Hebrews? Well, nobody knows. God knows, right? But he does also say, Origen, that it does reflect the thoughts of Paul. And I think there was certainly debate in the early church as far as like who wrote it. Some people thought it was Barnabas. Some people thought it was Luke. Some people thought it was the Apostle Paul himself. But I think a lot of people agree that it does have some Pauline thought. And I think it's actually kind of an interesting test case because a lot of times skeptics will say, well, yeah, the Gospels, they're anonymous. Come on. And they are formally anonymous in this, they don't identify who wrote them. But when you look in the early church, there's actual argument over who wrote Hebrews. But in the early church, nobody is arguing who wrote what gospel. Everybody gives the same exact attribution of authorship, no matter what part of the Roman Empire they're at, and it's everything that you see in the manuscript data is exactly the same. And so I think Hebrews is kind of nice because it shows you what an anonymous document actually looks like.
Well, anyways, I mean, this is where I think Paul of Apologia would do a better job with that topic than I would, as like, as far as I'm concerned, the anonymity isn't really the issue. For me, it's like I just go with what the consensus of scholars say, and that's that we don't actually know who wrote them. Yes, church tradition holds that Mark was written by someone learning from Peter in Rome, but that doesn't necessarily make that true. Then, like, I don't know, but I'm not familiar with like the early manuscripts of church fathers referencing the authorship of the Gospels.
Oh, I mean the early manuscripts, like of attribution of authorship, like according to, like
like Eusebius writing about who said what. That's the stuff that I don't know, because I'm apparently Paul's got a video coming out tomorrow about that.
Oh, is Paul watching?
Yes, he is.
Oh, okay. Hey, Paul.
Bad timing on that video. Paul put it out yesterday.
Yeah, come on, man. Help out
just
boy.
Publish it now. We'll just watch it together.
I want to know who it's responding to now. If Paul tells you in the chat, let me know, because one of these days I'm going to be a stick figure. I came so close recently because my video was an Apologia video. I felt I, as an apologist, have almost arrived. If I could just become a stick figure, then that would be like one of the highest honors of my life there.
I want to say that was one of the videos that I watched when I was trying to prepare for this, when we first discussed it. I'm like, okay, what kind of topics does he talk about that I'm actually interested in that we could land on? And I think you were like one of the 4 biggest proponents of the undesigned coincidences thing, which
we're the four horsemen of the McPologist. Yep.
Yes.
Me and McClatchy and the McGrew couple.
Yeah. Right. So now, with regards to the undesigned coincidences, my question there is, like, I know there are different categories of them. So, like, there's one gospel mentions the grass being green at this one location and the town was busy, and the other gospel mentions that it was Passover, which is a time when the grass would have been green and the town would have been busy. Sure. And so, like, yeah, I can kind of see how you can make a point where, like, there was no reason to mention the green grass or that it was Passover unless you already knew the story from the other gospel or whatever. But and then there's the other. Sorry, did I misrepresent that a bit? Like, I'm trying to give it a quick summary without getting into too much details.
Basically, basically the whole idea with the undesigned coincidences is that it's basically an unexpected connection between 2 or more accounts that appears unplanned by the individuals providing the accounts. And so, despite their independence, they line up seamlessly like 2 pieces of a puzzle kind of falling in together. And so, when John's mentioning the green grass, we would argue, when Mark mentions green grass, we would just say that the grass is green. That's why he mentioned it. We're not saying John read Mark. I mean, he could have read Mark, but we don't think that he intentionally was like, green grass. Ah, yeah, Passover. Let me fill that detail and make this look a little more real.
Yeah. So that is what I was trying to get at.
Okay. You're right on that.
Now, and like, that's one category of them. Another category is, I know you said in one video that, like, the word used to describe who executed John the Baptist was one that is not a common executioner. Sure. It's like one that is common to a military camp executioner. And then
that would be external confirmation.
Yeah, so then Josephus, so that wouldn't be classified as an undesigned coincidence in your mind?
I mean, it is in a way, but it's not.
Because, like, it's external to the Bible. So in my opinion, that's probably the strongest kind of undesigned coincidence there could be, is one that, like, Josephus had no reason to even want to confirm the Bible, even if he was writing as a Christian, which he obviously wasn't. So, like, to have Josephus...
Haven't you read the Testimonium? No, I'm just teasing.
That's
totally genuine.
That's how we know that it's not totally genuine. But
he was obviously a Christian.
Oh, yeah, I'm not a Christian, but this Jesus guy was totally the savior. So, like, the fact that he confirmed he was executed in a military camp rather than just, like, as a normal execution confirms that.
The same word.
Sure. Yeah. And I can grant that, like, okay, well, we know John the Baptist was a real guy, and whoever wrote the Gospels, if they used the appropriate word for him being executed in a military camp, and there is extra biblical references to him being executed there, that makes sense that they would use that word. I get that, and that in my mind, that is the like that's kind of the strongest version of that. But then to say, like, it kind of turns acceptance of the gospel into an all or nothing affair, because like then you get to like the census of Luke, which historically, like, that would have been impossible. An empire-wide census requiring people to travel to the towns of their distant ancestors in order to be registered.
It wasn't an empire-wide census.
I mean, that's what it said in the book.
No, he uses the same word as land. That's actually kind of a bad translation. Luke uses the exact same word in Acts 11:28, and it's just referring to the land of Judea. So when it says whole world, he's not talking. Okay. It's the whole land.
Okay. So
if you look at the Greek, that's actually a better translation, in my opinion.
Okay, that does make it make a bit more sense. But then we're still left with things like there is no record of a census that happened there. There's no reason why a census would require people to go to the land of their ancestors.
The Siete was a warrior tribe that had a census. There's external confirmation that we have of that,
and they made people go to the land of their ancestors to take.
Yeah. What? I did a response to Useful Charts, which some of your viewers might be familiar with. Useful Charts, really cool channel. Well, yeah, there's stuff like that. There's an Egyptian census that we have record where people traveled.
So I'm aware of the Egyptian one. I'm not familiar with the Siete one, but for the Egyptian one, it wasn't travel to the land of your ancestors. It was go back home to where you live.
Yeah. Well, let's think about what. Let me ask you this: Why do you think Luke would have invented a census?
Well, we could go with. I know you probably have low opinion of Richard Carrier, but there's the idea. Actually, no. This is one of the arguments against mythicism: is that they needed to find a way to have the prophecy match that Jesus was from Nazareth, and yet he was born in Bethlehem.
Okay. No,
so in order to make that match, there has to be a reason why his family would go from Nazareth to Bethlehem.
Sure. So two things. One, Luke never refers to that prophecy. Matthew does.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like we shouldn't just ascribe theological motivations. Luke's not shy about saying Jesus fulfilled prophecy when he wants to say that Jesus fulfilled prophecy, but he doesn't. So we shouldn't be.
Well, and this is... so this is where the non-mythicist argument comes in, is that it's not that he was trying to make it fulfill prophecy. It's that it was common knowledge that the Savior would come from Bethlehem. Okay, and this guy that we know as the Savior is known to be from Nazareth.
Sure. I mean, he could just be basing it on common knowledge and not referring to Micah 5:2. But
it's all speculation. I'm just saying that there is a reasonable...
Sure, but let's just think about this for just a second. If all that... Luke needed to do was to get Jesus born in Bethlehem, contrary to the fact. He didn't need to invent a census. That's like taking a steamroller and trying to crack a nut. He could have just had Jesus born in Bethlehem for any reason. He could have came up with anything. A census? Like
that just happens to be the one that he came up with.
That's a very
why is
heavy plot device. I think,
it is, but at this
is kind of strange, honestly. I just don't buy it.
I also don't buy that the infanticide that Herod carried out was a historical event. So like that
why not? It's perfectly consistent with Herod's character. He was crazy. He was deranged. He had people right before he was going to die executed. He did all kinds of things. It's totally
and somehow and somehow Josephus never mentioned that, the guy who cataloged the history.
It's a small town. Now, this is just totally an argument from silence. It's a huge argument from silence. Josephus never mentions that the Jews were expelled from Rome. So I mean that's a pretty weak argument from silence. There's also the fact that there's some pretty interesting evidence that we do have for this particular account. So again, with Josephus, right? He mentions that Archelaus was after Herod died, Archelaus became basically like the king. He wasn't king, he wasn't officially king, but he was kinging it after his father died in this particular area. And we have. Well, hold on. Let me just finish this one point real quick, and then you can hop in.
I just want a clarification on.
Oh, sure.
Because I know people are going to wonder why I didn't address this if I don't. But do you think the census in Luke is the actual census from 6 CE that we have from Quirinius, or is it a different
Yeah.
census that Quirinius did?
Yeah, Luke knows about that. If you read
Okay.
Luke 1
Yeah.
5,
Okay.
if
Okay.
you read Luke 1
I
5,
know
he says
Luke
that Herod
mentions
was
it.
king. Right. And
Yeah.
then Luke also says that Jesus started his ministry when he was 30 years old. So it's got to be the same one. He's not.
Okay. So
he's
then,
not
how do you
confused.
square the fact that like Luke is also the one that says that it was Herod the Great who carried out the infanticide thing, but he died like 10 years before the census of Quirinius?
Matthew says that the infanticide happened. It's in Matthew chapter 2.
Okay. Well, do you believe that both those things are true?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
there's no
Jesus was
reason to doubt
born in 4 BC and 6
No,
AD?
no, not at all. Again, I have a video responding to useful charts. I mean, I have a blog post that I can put in the chat if people want me to, that explains how this discrepancy is actually easily reconciled. It's not that really of a difficult discrepancy at all. I mean, I can pull it up if I want. It's not something I just like have off the top of my head, but Luke absolutely knows, like, when Jesus was born, he knows that Herod was born. That's when the angel comes to Zechariah and is like, "Hey, dude, you're going to have a baby, and this is how it's going to go down." He mentions that Herod was still in charge, and then in Luke chapter 3, at the beginning of Jesus's ministry, he says that he was 30 years old. So, if what you're saying is actually accurate, he wouldn't be 30 years old at that particular time. He'd be closer to 40. So that Luke knows there's just got to be something else going on with the particular reading of the census. Maybe it started and then was finished later or something like that. There's different ways that people have argued. There's even Inspiring Philosophy has a video where he thinks he argues that actually, no, Josephus is the one who actually got it wrong. Luke is actually the one who actually has it more accurate. And he goes into a bunch of details why. There are multiple scholarly theories, but the particular reading of the passages that you're referring to isn't as nearly as neat and tidy and straightforward as people like Bart Ehrman or whoever want to make it out to be. Like, not even close. Again, I have a video, just see my response to useful charts, or I have a blog post on the topic that goes into a lot much greater depth.
Does it not strike you as odd, though, that like you do believe that God is all powerful and he wants us to get a message out of his Bible, right?
Sure, but he uses people.
Okay, but like, why could he not make sure that the people make things more clear? Like, if he can get his important message to us, why can't he get it to us clearly with no contradictions that require these gymnastics to jump around?
I don't think this is gymnastics. It's just history, and history can be kind of messy. We're talking about a census.
Yeah, but we're talking about history that could have been controlled by an all-powerful being. Why could he not just make it more clear?
I mean, it is, now we're getting into divine hiddenness and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know. Why doesn't he just appear to everybody right now and say, "I'm God, worship me"?
Good question.
I don't know. And so I think he's given us an abundance of evidence that the evidence is far more on balance on the Christian side.
I don't know,
than it would be on the atheist side.
I don't know, but like you said, the explanation was straightforward, and then you gave this big, long, convoluted thing.
I don't think it was very convoluted. It just maybe I'm not as articulate on it. To a
layperson, it was pretty convoluted. Like, it just seems like, hey, Jesus was born when Herod the Great was king, and there was the census that happened 10 years after Herod the Great died when Jesus was born.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
No, I know that's not what you're saying. This is my position, is that like they are contradictory.
What if Luke just didn't make a mistake at all and Josephus did? And what if God, well, if you want to go strictly with theological explanations, then I could just play that game and go, okay, sure, Luke was right and Josephus got it wrong. He's writing after the fact. He's writing after Luke. There's good arguments as laid out by Inspiring Philosophy in a long video why Josephus got it wrong. Like, so what? So what if a secular historian wrote something, or a Jewish historian wrote something down and he was incorrect? How would that disprove the inspiration of the Bible?
Because you'd think God could stop that from happening? Like,
I don't know. It's to be incredibly weak, and I don't think that would be a good reason for anybody to go.
Why is it weak for an all-powerful being to not be able to like make sure that history makes it look like he's real?
No, but at this point, you're reaching a little bit.
Yes, that's a bit of a reach. But like, I'm not a historian. I'm not as familiar with these things as you are. But like, in my mind, like when I look at the study of history, it is the consensus that the census of Quirinius happened in 6 CE, whatever Mike might have said about it.
Like, I'm not impressed at all with biblical scholarly consensus, like whatsoever. It's a joke.
Yeah, because then you wouldn't go with the argument that you tend to favor.
No, it's not because
that is counter consensus.
My own cognitive dissonance, and I want the facts to fit me. It's the fact that I observe what biblical scholars do. They constantly make arguments from silence, weak arguments from silence, very bad, poor argument from silence. They cherry pick things all the time in order to create embellishments and developments. They have a really strong bias against any kind of like disharmonization. They engage in parallelomania. I mean, I could go on if you want, but biblical scholars, even Christian ones, don't necessarily always impress me. That's a discipline that is beset with all kinds of really bad historical habits that philosophers have looked at, people who specialize in epistemology, and they're like, what in the world is going on, you guys? So your
argument just relies on disregarding expert opinion. Like how can you sit here and say that, like, oh, this is what scholarly research suggests? Like, you have brought up scholarly opinions on things and then turn around.
Biblical scholarship, if you look at the Bible like a classical historian would and have the concept of whole document reliability,
if you look at the Bible like a classic historian would, you wouldn't go with the undesigned coincidences argument. Like, that's
classical historians have used undesigned coincidences.
That's an argument that was created by an apologist in the 1800s.
I could literally give you 10 I could give you 10 different secular examples from secular history where people have used undesigned coincidences. In fact, Jeffrey Tripp, who was just on the Myth Vision podcast, pulled out an example of a undesigned coincidence from Plutarch and a couple of other guys.
Do they actually call it undesigned coincidences, or is there a different word for it?
Because there's nothing wrong with it.
Because I looked into it. I couldn't find, like, when I was trying to find examples of non-Christians using it, like, all I could find was people saying that they don't use it. So, like, do they call it something else?
I don't know if they necessarily will call it by name, but it's the exact same concept. It's history. This is just the way testimony works. There's nothing wrong with the whole concept of undesigned coincidences. If you see somebody, if one witness says, I saw a bank robber whose shoe was untied, and then another separate witness says, I saw a bank robber and he tripped, and they're both just talking about what they witnessed, but the fact that those two things coincide, that doesn't undo it, the whole idea. I mean, that's
but I mean,
that has evidential weight.
Yeah, but then if video footage comes out and shows him not tripping over his shoelace but tripping over the curb, like,
but that's still,
like, I know, but there are reasons why those two things could line up that have nothing to do with.
Are you saying that undesigned coincidences isn't something that we could use in any kind of history or any kind of testimony or different things like that?
I'm saying it doesn't appear to be one that historians do use.
I'm telling you that I have multiple examples of historians that do. Even Dale Allison, the guys that talked about it the other day, the Harkey amateur exegete and non-alchemist, they were talking about it, and they gave specific examples. Even Matt Harkey was willing to admit that, like, some of these examples aren't necessarily that bad, and they come from other biblical scholars who are not religious apologists at all. If anything, Allison has written against apologetics. He doesn't call it by undesigned coincidences, but he does provide examples.
So what?
Harkey pulled an example out from another guy who was a biblical scholar, and I don't think he was a religious guy at all. So
what would a historian call it? And why do you call it something different?
I don't know. It could be an interlocking, unrelated detail. It doesn't have to have terminology. What's wrong with the concept?
I mean, if it's a methodology that is consistently used, it generally has a terminology.
Well, so, like, it's not like we're saying it's like, what is it? The criterion of embarrassment or the criterion of dissimilarity or the, criterion of Semitisms or different things like that. We're not using it as a criteria to find out which piece by piece by piece of the Gospels is accurate or something like that. What we're saying is that there are dozens of undesigned coincidences between the Gospels and between Acts and Paul's letters. And that's best explained on the hypothesis that these are testimonies of people who are close up to the facts, rather than it is on the hypothesis of literary invention.
Well, I mean, could they not just be undesigned coincidences of a fictional event?
No, I don't.
Like, to your bank robber shoe thing. If two people were writing about a bank. Yeah, but like if two
Sure.
people are writing about a bank robbery and they just call it by the same thing, but they're writing independently and they have no idea of the other one's story, one of them might write a story where the bank robber's shoe is untied, and another one might write a story where the bank robber tripped. That doesn't mean that it's an actual event, and that doesn't mean that they are both witnesses to the event or interviewed witnesses to that event. Like they're just completely mundane observations that, like, yeah, if you look for them, you're going to find things like that can match up.
No, I don't really think so, because one, yeah, you might see like one every now and then pop in. Of course, sure. We've always said that. We've always been upfront of that. That could be statistical noise, or it could be deliberate design. But what you're not going to see,
like pattern. Like it looks like
no. What pattern finding is what is what Jesus mythicists do. I know people want to compare us to that, but because we both don't want to buck consensus. But sorry, pattern finding is like, oh yeah, Jesus is just like Horus because of, you know, all of these different reasons. That's pattern finding.
No, that's stupid Zeitgeist movie.
Well, whatever. Okay, forget Horus. Let's say Romulus. Okay, let's say Romulus. Let's pick ones that people like Dennis McDonald. You know, let's say, oh yeah, it looks like Homer. He must have been borrowing from Homer. Okay, like that's pattern finding. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about interlocking details that are dozens and dozens of them.
Yeah, but they're
best explained. It's not, but
they're things that don't ultimately matter, and they could just be there for no reason other than that's a detail that author wanted to include. Like, it doesn't mean that it's an actual event.
Why wouldn't it have
like
any?
To go to the green
any individual way?
To go to the green
Sure.
grass example that I'm most familiar with because it's the one that I talked about in my video. It's the one that I've seen you respond to. Like,
Sure.
if I'm an author writing a book, painting a picture, something, maybe I just want it to evoke images of a nice spring day. So I say the grass is green and the town is busy because it's a nice spring day. Everybody's busy bustling around. And then someone else writes that it's Passover. That doesn't mean that these undesigned coincidences make it a true event. The authors could have had completely different intentions with regards to that.
Sure, or it could be testimony. They also mentioned that the boat loaves that were used were barley loaves. Well, this was also Passover was during the time of the barley harvest. He also turns to
but if you're
Philip. Philip is of the wise unknown disciple that talks 3 whole times in the Gospel of John. We read in Luke's Gospel that Philip was actually from Bethsaida, or excuse me, that the feeding of the 5,000 was in Bethsaida. John tells us in a completely unrelated passage in chapter 1 and also chapter 12 that Philip was from Bethsaida.
Okay, but if so now this is where we get to, like, if they were independent stories and we knew that John did not have access to Luke, then that would carry more weight. But as it is, like, he's just...
But they're casual. So what you're missing is...
What does that matter?
What you're missing is, because normally when you see something, you're like purposely trying to connect it. These don't look like they're trying purposely to connect it. John doesn't
mean that
John isn't sitting there and going, you know what? Whoa, green grass, Mark. I totally.
He doesn't have to. He just,
and then he's like, I'm going to add Passover, but I'm going to say absolutely nothing about the green grass. And then you know what?
Yeah, because he's got a different style. He doesn't want to talk about green grass because that's just not how. That's not the important detail to him.
What you're appealing to is possibility.
That's what you're appealing to. We're both just sitting here saying, like, well, it could be this, well, it could be that. We don't know because we're not inside the heads of.
I'm appealing to probability, and I think that the more probable hypothesis is that it's based on testimony.
I think the more probable hypothesis is just that John was familiar with the story. He was writing down a story that was already widely known.
Right. And
so, like, some of the details are going to match up.
We're talking about one particular story, but there's the fact that this is stuff that we see a pattern of them crisscrossing with each other dozens of times, like multiple times. And so,
because they're writing the same story from...
Right.
Like, there's no reason there's no reason why this would mean that it's actually true.
Let me give you a different example, if you don't like that particular example, okay? And so in Mark's gospel, we have Herod, and he's just like, what's the deal with this Jesus guy? You know, where's he got his powers from? Is he John the Baptist that's been raised from the dead? Okay. So Matthew tells the same story, but he mentions that this particular saying was said to his servants. Okay. And so, all right, that's interesting. What's going on? We're not really told. We don't, how does Matthew even know what private conversations are happening in Herod's household, you know? But if we go over to Luke's gospel, chapter 8, completely unrelated passage where Luke is not trying to explain the death of John the Baptist, he says that Jesus had some women followers, and one of them was Joanna, the wife of Huzzah, who is Herod's household manager. So, now we see how Matthew could have this particular detail of what was being said.
That seems so tenuous. Like,
but it does it fit or does it not?
But why would, like, if he's putting that in there, why would he not mention that? That's like, why is he not saying?
You said it.
You're making an argument from silence, though.
No, I'm not making an argument from silence. I'm saying that I'm making an argument from data. No, it explains why somebody would know why he said it, and it explains.
Okay, but like, how do we know that? How do we know that Luke got that information from that person? Like, why are we saying that? Why?
We don't know that. That's the thing that we're inferring. It's an inference that we're making to the best.
But how does that even mean that? Like, it's just like, oh, this person exists who
because
it was related to a certain.
You're just using common sense. You're just thinking. Evidentially, you're going, oh, that would explain it. Now, again, if that's just one, and that was like all we had, then in the green grass, and that's all we had, then like big whoop-de-doo. Who cares?
No,
like,
these are all big whoop-de-doo. Who cares? Like they're not actually connected.
But you don't get dozens of big whoop-de-doos.
When you get four different people telling the same story repeatedly, sometimes copying word for word from one another, yes, you do. You're going to get things that just happen to kind of match up, especially in the cases of like Mark and Luke copying word for word from, or no, sorry, Matthew and Luke copying word for word from Mark. When you're editing I know I'm just saying like when you are editing someone else's work, sometimes little details like that get left behind where you cut off why that one would be a detail to write down. Sometimes that happens.
That's not, both details aren't in Mark though.
I'm not talking about the specific example. I'm just saying that like in a situation where you are doing that sort of editorial work, sometimes you get an orphan reference that shows up.
So there's an orphan reference that lines up with another orphan reference, and then this happens dozens of times.
Yes.
But it's not testimony. Is that what you're telling me?
No, it's people editing other people's work and writing down stories that they're familiar with.
So people are just making up stories, but these are details that are little, minute, obscure, that have very little to do with the actual story itself. Don't add anything theological to the story itself. There's stray details, comments, but they're fictions that just happen to interlock over and over.
Yeah, because if you get people repeating a story over and over and over again, sometimes they'll add extraneous details that don't actually matter. I have ADHD. Ask my partner about how I tell stories sometimes. There's so many details that have no bearing on the story whatsoever. So if I'm repeating someone else's story, sometimes those details will get orphaned.
If that's what you want to go with, that's fine.
Like these stories weren't written down for decades until like after the events that they're supposed to be recording.
If they're within living memory, people remember different things.
And people have shit memories. Sorry for the language. I know you probably don't appreciate that. I've been holding
offended. I'm gonna rage quit right now. No, I'm just kidding.
One of the Christian viewers needs to donate money to the charity now to make up for my swearing.
yeah. It's a purgatory kind of thing.
Yeah, but
okay. Well, here.
But this
let me give you another example.
It's not. No. Let me address the memory thing though, because they were written down in living memory. But like the amount of time that's passed and how bad we know human memory is, like look up the work of Elizabeth Loftus sometime. Like she has made a career out of pointing out that like in trial situations, even when you have witnesses that agree on things and we're obviously not corroborating their stories together.
Is that
human memory is garbage.
Bad memories don't over, especially about obscure details, don't over and over and over.
They do. If you're writing down a story that's been repeated over and over and over again, you get those orphan references, and in different communities, the reference might get orphaned in different ways.
So what you're positing is that basically all the coincidences are in one basic thing of oral tradition. So oral tradition, dozens and dozens of years after the event, was Jesus said something to Philip, and part of the oral tradition is Philip is from Bethsaida, and part of the oral tradition is green grass. Part of the oral tradition
it's a detail of the story that some people remember that detail. They don't.
They're not. We know what Christian oral tradition looks like. It looks like 1 Corinthians 15. It looks like Philippians 2:6. It doesn't look like
that's when it's like a chant that you're reciting. Is like that's not the story.
It doesn't look like green grass. And
how do you know that? How do you know that?
So
have you ever?
You can't have your telephone game analogy and then do this too. You can't. Like, if you want, maybe you don't use the telephone game analogy, but a lot of you guys do. And I'm sorry, but like, you can't have that and say that. But
why not? Why does
because it doesn't go together, dude. Like, just think about it for a second. Like, no, it's like they really remembered all these minute details.
It's not about really remembering all the
evolved. Like,
I'm telling you from my personal experience that's how I tell stories. I will remember minute details that have nothing to do with anything. So you get two different people.
Gospels. Would you have this level of skepticism if it wasn't? Okay. Well, I appreciate the consistency.
Like, I don't.
Can I give you another example that has absolutely nothing to do with literary dependence? Just if that's okay.
Sure.
I hope I'm not being a turd here, buddy. I'm sorry. Okay. So let's think about which one do I want to use here? All right, Paul. All right. So in Acts 18, all right, Acts isn't using a gospel, all right?
I mean, it's written by the same guy who wrote Luke.
Right. But he's not borrowing from a gospel.
No, but it's not like he doesn't have access to them.
You're jumping in too quick. And so basically Paul is in Corinth. Yeah, he's in Corinth. He's working. He's making tents, okay? He's with Priscilla and Aquila, okay? And it says in Acts 18, 3-5, it says, when Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul began devoting himself completely to the word. So before, he was working 6 days a week, then he was preaching in the synagogues, okay? And then all of a sudden, but with no explanation, he stops working and he starts preaching full time. Okay, so like, what's going on? Like, is Paul a slacker? What changed his work from all week? Okay, well, if you go to 2 Corinthians 11, 8-9, it says, I robbed other churches by accepting a support from them in order to serve you. But when I was with you and was in need, I didn't burden anyone, for the brothers who came down from Macedonia supplied my need. So we see in Acts that these people came from Macedonia. Then all of a sudden, Paul starts working full time, but it doesn't say anything about him getting this big offering from this other church. And then in 2 Corinthians 11, we see that people came from Macedonia and they supplied to his need. He's explicit about it. But none of these details, you don't get all of the details in either. And most critical scholars are going to tell you that the author of Acts doesn't know of Paul's letters. He doesn't use Paul's letters. He doesn't utilize them. In fact, they'll tell you that they sometimes contradict them. And so they couldn't be using them. And you see dozens of these in the book of Acts. Plus you see them in the Gospels. Again, I just think this is way better explained on the hypothesis that this is on eyewitness testimony than it is just people just making stuff up.
Okay, well, so maybe that one is because Luke knew Paul. I don't know. Maybe that one does. But that's a much more significant example than the grass was green.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's just toss the gospel ones out. Philip was from that town. Okay, so toss those out.
Yeah, like I have no problem. Like, okay, I know there is discussion about whether or not Luke actually was a traveling companion of Paul.
Bart Ehrman says he's definitely not.
Sure. Paul is in the chat saying the conflicts between Acts and the genuine Pauline letters would and have fill a book. So I'm assuming there's a lot going on here that I'm not familiar with.
They wouldn't fill a book. Paul, we could have that discussion sometime if you like. I'd love to. I don't think they'd fill a book. There are some interesting contradictions. I will grant you that. But there is way more in terms of undesigned coincidences. And we know that, sometimes in eyewitness testimony, there's, some variation in different things like that. But there are dozens and dozens of these, not to mention all the external corroboration that we have that Paul's a traveling companion of Paul. And I think that it's way better of a hypothesis that
I'm not going to argue that one because I don't know the arguments on either side for that one. So I'm just going to remain agnostic about that one.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But yeah, I like, if the examples you had from the gospel had that level of detail where it's actually like the
It's the same
Macedonians.
author, though. But it's
Yeah,
one
but
of the same authors.
it's not talking about the events of Jesus' life there though. It's talking about Paul. Like, Paul is a guy that we
Right.
actually have
So
writings from. There's a lot
if
more historical stuff
if
from Paul,
if he
regarding Paul.
if he traveled with Paul, I'm sorry.
Okay, but
I apologize. I apologize if I jump in a few times. I definitely do.
I'm not
I don't
contesting that he
want to be
traveled
jerk.
with Paul. Like, I know there are
Right.
lots of
Sure.
people in my
So
chat who
let's
would contest that, but I don't know the argument, so I'm not
let's
gonna.
well, let's follow that a little bit. As I said earlier, if he did really travel with Paul, and he did write a gospel, right, and he did write Acts, and he was in Jerusalem with Paul, he would have had ample opportunity to interview witnesses. Maybe he became aware of Mark's gospel at that particular time. I don't know, and started using it as a part of one of his sources. And then
I feel like he probably wrote
validated it.
the book of Luke before he wrote Acts.
Well, yes, of course, right. But I'm talking about events that are described in Acts, right? So he's with Paul in Jerusalem in Acts 21. He would have had information. He would have been able to interview witnesses at that particular point. And so, like, and if he's showing himself to be a reliable person over and over and over again with these kind of details, then it just kind of inductively speaking, then we're going to look at Luke. We're going to look at Luke, and we're going to go, okay, well,
like, to say that he's reliable, that he's reliable. Okay, I know there are lots of people that are going to contest the whole Acts as a reliable book, but it's a completely different ballgame to say he's reliable in reporting events that, yeah, he actually was there for, versus he's reliable at reporting events that other people have told him about.
Why wouldn't he be? I mean, he's getting,
because at that point he's relaying stories that other people are telling him, and then that.
Sure. Why is he relaying these particular stories while he's risking his neck with Paul? And then don't you think that he has opportunity to investigate these stories and see if they're true? And then we do have these other documents that have the same sort of these different indicators of testimony with the external corroborations that we talked about, as well as the internal corroborations that you're not as quite of a fan of, but you'll admit their history, at least with Paul's letters and Acts, or at least interesting prima facie.
I'm admitting that I'm not familiar enough with that to argue against it. I don't actually.
Well,
but
I mean, I think if you look at them with an open mind, I think I've had atheist friends who are like, you know what, I know a guy who made a whole video against me, and it was like, no, you know what, I think you're right. I think Luke really did travel with Paul after all. He reversed his position. So, like, I don't know. I just think you see this data all across. And I think it's more consistent.
It's just the level, like the level of example you're using. Like, anytime it's something outside of the Gospels, just like the quality of the example you have just goes straight up. Whereas when it's something in the Gospels, it's like Philip was from this region and Jesus asked him where to get the bread.
Well, yeah, but that's not the only thing that we have.
No, that's not. But
these are the examples that you're familiar with. I mean, what other examples are you familiar with?
I don't remember them offhand. I did watch a couple of your videos on them, and I was about equally unimpressed with them.
But how many examples did I give in this particular video? Do you remember which video it was?
Nope.
Okay.
This was way back when we first started interacting.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, again, I think there are several of them, and they're not just like several, but like,
okay. What do you think is your best example that actually would confirm something in the Gospels?
The thing is, it's a cumulative case, right? So you can't. It's kind of like, sure, the whole point of undesigned coincidences is they're not like one big smoking gun.
Yeah, okay, but like, as far as I can see, you don't even have a little smoking gun though. Like, the grass was green and Phil was from this place.
The whole part of cumulative case is that if you add up enough little pieces, it can equal the weight of one big piece. But yeah, I'll give you another example. That's fine. And so there is, let me see here. John chapter 12, 1 through 2, 12 through 13, we find this detail. There's 6 days before Passover. Jesus therefore came to Bethany where Lazarus was, and whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave him dinner there. Martha served. Lazarus was one reclining with him at table. Verse 12, the next day, the large crowd had come to a feast that heard that Jesus was coming from Jerusalem. So they took they did the whole palm branch thing, Hosanna and triumphal entry and all that stuff. Okay, so John provides this very specific detail not found in the other gospel accounts. Jesus arrived in Bethany 6 days before Passover, and then the following day he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, making it 5 days before Passover. Can we confirm John's accuracy? Well, if we go to Mark 11, 1 through 11, it also tells us about the story of the triumphal entry. When they drew near to Jerusalem from Bethphage to Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples and said to him, "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately as you enter, you will find a colt tied, which no one has ever sat, and tie it and bring it." So they brought the colt to Jesus, he threw his cloaks on it and sat on it. Many spread their cloaks on the road, and leafy branches, all that other stuff. And yeah, they go through the whole triumphal entry. So,
Okay.
while Mark doesn't explicitly state that Jesus approached Bethany 6 days before Passover or that he rode in Jerusalem the next day, it's implied that they fetched the colt in the early morning. They went through a series of events, including the entering the temple, looking around at everything, which likely took a whole day. If we assume Jesus entered Jerusalem 5 days before Passover, as explicitly mentioned in John and implicitly suggested in Mark, we can start counting down the days described in Mark's gospel to see if it aligns with John's timeline.
So are you really just saying that? Like,
no, I'm getting some. I'm getting some here. I'm not done.
So is this about how many days it was? Like, what is the detail that we're?
Yeah, it's going to be, they're going to corroborate on the amount of days, right?
So could that not just be a detail, like that could just be because they're telling the same story?
Well, are they going to get this particular detail correct? You're going to say that they're exactly correct on the same level of days, but at the same time, people are going to say that John actually contradicts the day that Jesus died.
Well, I mean, John contradicts the year that Jesus died, but
no, he doesn't.
He does. In John, the Last Supper was not the Passover meal. Passover happened after Jesus' death, whereas in the other Gospels,
the last on that one too.
Okay, well,
yeah, it's that I don't buy that one at all. But whatever, I don't have to finish this one. The whole point is that if you actually look at the different details, there's no way that they're copying one another to get this particular detail.
No, so but they're just telling the same story. And if the story was that he got to Jerusalem 5 days before the Passover, then
if they're just making up the same story, they're not going to get all these different.
They're not making it up independently, though. They're telling the same story.
So you're gonna. Well, first of all, you didn't hear me even give the entire example, but you're automatically assuming that it's bad. So well,
I mean, you're just basically saying that they however they say that there were 5 days, that is the detail, right?
It's all right. We can just spare the details on this one. It's fine. It just seems to me like you gotta let it develop a little bit before you just kind of decide well, they're just telling the same story and John probably copied, and
I just don't see how does undesigned coincidences, because you would
have to be reading, because what you guys are saying is you're saying that they're really, 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 really copying closely, but at the same time they're super, super sloppy.
No, and they're just telling the same story in different ways, and sometimes those details will match up because it's the same story.
Right.
I just don't see how that's.
But then they also contradict each other all the time, and so they're
because they're telling different versions of the same story,
which would be consistent with eyewitness
testimony. It's like the differences between the Lord of the Rings books, the cartoon that came out in the 70s, and Peter Jackson's trilogy. There are going to be little details that aren't really important to the story that match up between them. And there's also a bunch of stuff that's very different because they're telling the same story in different ways.
So what I want you to do is parody this argument, or you don't have to do this, but any of your skeptical viewers who have YouTube channels can do this. Maybe Paula G will be like, game on. Paula G knows his Star Wars. I almost called it Star Trek, and every nerd in the planet was gonna let's watch this.
No, Star Wars and Star Trek are the same thing until we get the donations to 4,000.
Go ahead.
Patrick Stewart played Captain Kirk flawlessly.
Find dozens of undesigned coincidences between the accounts in Star Wars, like real ones, subtle, casual, interlocking details, and then parody it, and then
I'm sure you could if you're going hunting for details like that, because a lot of these details you're having to make up this whole backstory to explain why. Yeah, you're making up a backstory as to why.
I'm saying it's more plausibly inferred on the fact that the Gospels are written by people who are closer to the facts,
or they're just different people telling the same story.
I'm saying this is not something that's a good fit on the hypothesis that they're pulling crap out of their butt.
I'm not saying they're pulling crap out of their butt. I'm not saying they're inventing the story. I'm saying they're different people telling different versions of the same story.
Yeah, well, I'm saying that too.
Because like Peter Jackson wasn't pulling the story out of his butt when he was telling the story. He was telling his version.
But it's fiction, right? When I say
yes, so's the Gospels. That's my point. That's my point. They're telling the same story. And it's fiction. He's not pulling it out of his butt. They're just telling a story that's already known. And sometimes the details match up.
No, sometimes the details match up. Sometimes they contradict each other.
Yeah,
but it can't be eyewitness testimony.
If you look at how the character of Faramir was portrayed, he's very different in the books and in the movies. That's very contradictory. But sometimes the details match up.
What I'm saying,
sometimes they catch Gollum at the pool.
They don't do it in subtle, casual, interlocking ways over and over and over and over and over again.
Yes, they do.
And then also corroborate with like actual history over and over and over again.
I'm sure somewhere in Lord of the Rings he mentions that grass was green, and in the books and movies the grass is also green sometimes.
And now you're doing something totally anachronistic by comparing the Bible or the New Testament to the Lord of the Rings, when like modern realistic fiction isn't a genre that wasn't invented until a whole lot later.
That doesn't matter. The point is they're telling the same story. The fact that they have these little coincidences that match up does not make the story true.
Apocryphal gospel writers are telling the same story, but you're not going to find the level of what I'm talking about with the Gospels. You're not.
Just a second. I'm going to have to bookmark this part of the stream because I feel like I could do that. I closed it because I don't need it. So this is future video fodder for me. Oh, bloody hell. Sorry, YouTube doesn't make this easy.
No, they don't.
Bookmark. There we go. Yeah, so I feel like you could definitely find some undesigned coincidences if you went hunting for them in the apocryphal gospels. But the thing is, you don't apply. Go for it. But have you ever tried that?
I'm throwing down the gauntlet.
Have you ever tried that?
Go for it. Yes, I've looked at these different things. There's not the level of external. Okay, read the Acts of Tom.
Did you apply the same level of like willingness to contort your mind to make it fit?
Just read the Acts of Thomas, for example, right? He mentions King.
Sorry, one moment. I've got people sending super chats again. I will forward that $20. So far, I think I'm at. I'm gonna have to go back and look at the earlier stream. I think I'm at $25 total that I have to send to the charity. But yeah, give directly through the link that's pinned in the chat, because YouTube takes a 30% cut of that. I will eat the 30% cut. That's fine, whatever. But don't donate through super chats.
So. I was saying that Acts of Thomas, right? He mentions like King Dundas Forest. Woo, an external confirmation. Wow. Okay. But that's like an easy one. That's like
they're all easy ones.
They're all easy ones? Okay. Let's
the grass is green and it was Passover. He arrived 5 days before 5 days before Passover in Jerusalem. Like it's all such basic simple stuff that like it doesn't actually say it. Like 0 + 0 + 0 = 0.
Okay. So let's take another example here, right? All right. So this is Acts 27. It says there was a moderate south wind came up, supposing they had attained their purpose. They weighed anchor, began sailing along Crete, close inshore. But very long there, they rushed from the land of a violent wind called Euraquilo. I hope I'm saying that right. And when the ship was caught in it that they could not face the wind, it gave way to let themselves be driven along, running under the shelter of a small island called Cauda. Now, Cauda is 20 miles west-southwest of where the storm likely struck the travelers in the Bay of Masara. This is precisely actually what we know from meteorological data, where the trajectory of northeaster should have carried them. This is not the sort of information that somebody would have inferred unless they were actually carried there by the wind themselves. We have Ptolemy, we have Pliny the Younger. Hold on, let me finish. See, you're not.
You've interrupted me so many times in this. I can get a couple in myself. But like I don't.
Yeah, you're right. You're fine.
Like again, this is the thing. Like part of Paul's life. Like I accept that a lot of the details about like that are recorded in the Bible about where Paul went when. I accept that a lot of that is true. So and this is where you get the stronger example where it's like, yeah, meteorologically, this is where a storm in that region would have blown it. Sure, fine. But like, I don't have a problem with saying that people that knew Paul's journeys were the ones writing about Paul's journeys. Whereas like the story of Jesus is like, a lot of it is fiction. And like these little details, like there's nothing that rises to that level.
Like, well, I mean, the one that you were talking about before, like why would why would Herod kill the babies and all this other stuff? And we don't have any mention of that. Well, I didn't get to finish, but before, like when they were coming back, okay, here's what happened. Like, again, Archelaus became king, basically. There was a skirmish in the temple. Some people got angry that there were some Roman soldiers by the temple. There was a big fight. Archelaus was the new sheriff in town. He overreacted. He had, there was a bunch of Jews, like I want to say 3,000 people who were slaughtered in the temple. Passover was canceled, okay? And you have the story in Matthew chapter 2, where Joseph and Mary are back on the road, traveling back from Egypt. And they're like, hey, they probably would have heard this story. And Joseph, we read, he gets scared and he's like, I'm not moving back to Nazareth or to Bethlehem or whatever. He's not going back there. He decides to go to, he puts it up to Nazareth instead, where Archelaus was not king. It was his brother. It was a different one. And so, again, that's not a detail that he's getting from Josephus and piping that in there and going, it's going like this story that supposedly is made up never happened, yet at the same time dovetails perfectly with an example of history that we know from Josephus, that like Archelaus killed a bunch of Jews, and we know these people were traveling all over the place.
There's a big difference between like, hey, this is where storms happen to happen in that area, therefore that's where a ship probably would have been blown in a shipwreck situation, and a story that is being told by people who are familiar with that event, adding in a reference to it,
But never mentions anything about the slaughter. He never mentions anything about what happened to the Jews in the temple.
If you're going to connect any of that. Yeah, but if you're going to connect them going to Nazareth instead of Bethlehem as evidence that they were familiar with that event, then like, even if I grant that, that still doesn't say that the Joseph going to Bethlehem actually happened. That doesn't actually have any bearing on the actions of Joseph in the story.
But he says that he heard of this. He heard what happened, or he heard these people. He says that he heard that Archelaus was king, and he's like, yikes. But it doesn't explain why he yikesed. And so we don't know. There's nothing about Archelaus and how bad of a character he is in the Gospels. Yeah. What I'm saying though is,
so again, how does that even confirm anything then?
What I'm saying is, when you cumulatively, if I can get the word out, over and over and over these kind of details, I'm just saying that it's better explained on the hypothesis that these are witnesses.
But again, this is just a big nothing. Like it's like, this isn't even something that's mentioned in the Bible. He's just saying, Archelaus was there.
These things don't really count. But when Luke gets the census wrong, allegedly, or they make other historical errors, like you pointed out in the video, the guy, Jesus goes up and then he goes the other way, or that the Sea of Galilee is a different thing. Yeah, or all this other stuff. That counts. So when they get details wrong, that counts against it. When they get details right, that doesn't really count. That's a big nothing.
Yes, actually.
So what the problem is...
And that makes perfect sense, because you're trying to use these details to say that it's reliable in everything else that it says. But
no, I'm not.
So you don't think the Gospels are reliable?
No, that's a loaded question.
Do you acknowledge that they made errors?
Sure. I think they made a few.
And you... So now, if I could address
the whole thing, like out of, you don't throw it out the window, just like you don't throw any testimony out.
No, I'm not saying you throw the whole thing out the window. I'm just saying that it has shown itself to be not reliable, and like these little undesigned coincidences don't make it reliable. Like they are pretty much nothing. And then when you see the big things where they are wrong,
a couple of discrepancies does not sink the entire thing.
No, it doesn't sink the entire thing, but it does call its reliability into question. And like when the things you have that show that it's reliable are these big nothing burgers, that
I could
doesn't
think
actually
of
support it.
I could think of 6 decent contradictions, and I can think of all of these other different pieces of evidence, where there are dozens and
Well,
dozens of them.
let's get to the
internally and
geography.
externally.
Let's get to the geography thing, because this
Sure.
is one thing that you addressed in one of your videos. I think it was one of the ones that published after our interaction. But it was like part of it was about the topography of Israel. I will acknowledge that, like, yeah, there's terrain there that I'm unfamiliar with. The video that I was responding to, it was the thing that I found most interesting about that one, though, is that they like went to Google Maps and did like directions from this place to that place, and it gave the big roundabout thing. But the reason it did that is because there's a border in there that's illegal to cross. So,
Yeah,
so
that might be a
when you do like directions from here to a place close on that border, like there's clear way to get through there, and it's got less of an elevation change. So like, I don't know the local topography, maybe like back in ancient days following a river, whatever, that makes sense. But one of the things that you seem to have missed is that it doesn't just say that he went through the Decapolis to get to the Sea of Galilee. It's that he went through the midst of the Decapolis, so the middle of it, which was significantly to the south and east of the Sea of Galilee. So it's not just that he went up before he came down, it's that he went all the way around in a big old spiral.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look at that one. No, that's a fair point. I'll check it out.
And like, I am fully willing to admit that, like, I don't speak Greek. I especially don't speak ancient Greek, so maybe there's some play with the word that was used to mean midst there. I don't know, but that was the thing that stuck out to me about that.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. That's I'll look into that and see. I'd have to investigate.
Apparently people are laughing at my hair bobble. It's not bobbling tonight.
Yeah, I don't have the bobble. I just have a backwards hat. People, I get these dumb comments for like, were you trying to be Fred Durst with the red backwards hat? I'm like, I turn it forward and it's a Washington Nationals hat, and they're like, oh, what is that, Walgreens? And so I just can't win.
Yeah, no, I feel that. Yeah, so like, I don't know. I just don't see how, like, when you like the evidence that you bring to the table that they are reporting reliable history is just like these little tiny things that don't add up to anything compared to the things that it gets wrong. You have to come up with these big elaborate explanations for why they're not actually wrong, when on their face they look wrong.
I don't think that I have to come up with, what do you want to say it, mental gymnastics in order to say that no, actually they did get it right. I think with eyewitness testimony, you are going to see some discrepancies. People could have memory lapses. But what I'm saying is there's an epistemic asymmetry, is when you have a bunch of things that point to memory, and then really what you're talking about, you know, a contradiction here or historical error there, and I'm not talking about like major stuff, then that's also consistent with memory. And then
so can I just get your position on something? Do you believe in biblical inerrancy?
Well, I hope people don't get offended with me, or I lose anybody, but no, I'm not a hard inerrantist.
Okay.
I do think there are some good candidates for discrepancies in the Gospels. Perhaps someday I'll lay those out in a video. Like the centurion servant one, I don't try and harmonize that one. I just think, you know, Matthew or Luke, Matthew remembered it different or something. Luke got it from somebody else, or I don't know.
It's good to get that out on the table, because like if I'm talking to someone who believes in inerrancy, it's way easier to show that the Bible's wrong.
Then I have to shoehorn everything, and I'm trying to not let my theological presuppositions be 100% color the way that I do history. Everybody's gonna have their biases and their the way that they see things color the way that they look at evidence. But no, I'm not. I think that there are good candidates for contradictions even within the Gospels, or Acts and Paul's letters. But I don't think that there are any that are strong enough to like just sink the whole thing. You can't just have like a few pet discrepancies, kind of go, okay, all of this other positive evidence just goes right out the window. And I just disagree with you that they are nothing burgers. I think that when you get lots of little pieces, they can add up to one large cumulative case.
See, here's the thing is that, like, I'm not even like a priori against the idea that the Bible like that the Gospels are reporting on events that actually happened. Like, I'm not against the idea that, like, I'm not a mythicist. I believe that there, like, the claim that there was a guy named Yeshua running around first century Judea preaching a version of like apocalyptic Judaism that was fairly commonly preached by other apocalyptic preachers of the time and managed to get on Rome's radar somehow and was executed by crucifixion. I feel like that is such a mundane claim as to not even be worth arguing against. So like the idea that like, yeah, sure, like to go back to the green grass thing again, I know people in the chat are probably tired of this, but like I actually don't, I'm not on principle opposed to the idea that like, yes, they were both talking about the same event and those details are there because it was true. I don't feel like that is, like it's a nothing burger. Like I said, like there are so many other reasons why somebody would mention green grass or would mention that it's Passover or like, and none of it speaks to the reliability. It's everything that you've put forward as these undesigned coincidences are all like hypothetical. I think that maybe this is why they match up.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously in a stream like this, I'm not like running through a presentation and giving like all of the ones that I think are the best ones all in a row. I know you've watched some of my videos and appreciate that. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would say read up on it some more. And if you still think it's bad, then please critique it, because most of the critiques that I've seen so far are very hasty, I would say. And not always the best thought out. I do appreciate the guys on Alchemist channel for reading Lydia McGrew's book on the topic, and at least trying to engage on it at that level, because most people haven't read it, including Richard Carrier, who maybe he read it, but then he started like citing examples that Lydia didn't even use. And so I would just say my advice to skeptics is just like read the book and go through it. Some of the examples you might be like, some of the examples you'd be like, that's interesting. And then critique it, you know, let's sharpen each other. Let's get better. I don't want to, I don't think the reliability, like I'm not a Christian because of undesigned coincidences by itself. You know what I mean? It's just part of why I'm one.
So I think for a good chunk of this conversation, we might've been talking past each other because I'm not a priori against the idea of the Bible, like reporting, obviously I think they're exaggerated versions of things that actually happen, but like, I think there probably is a kernel of truth in a lot of the stories that are there, but I don't feel like the undesigned coincidences are a good argument to support that. So like, and like, maybe that would have changed the way you approach things if you knew that I'm not just rejecting everything.
No, I don't think that you're rejecting everything. I didn't get that idea at all.
Okay.
Maybe I've just let past experience talking to other people dictate, because most people are just really dismissive of the whole thing. And like, you know, literary dependence, boom, it can't be undesigned. And that's not even understanding the argument. No, you're not saying that. You're not saying that.
No, I actually kind of am saying that, because that takes it back to it's just different people telling the same story in different ways. So there are going to be some of these things that are the same, but don't seem to have a good reason for making them the same.
But they're not all in. They're not all in the same text, and so what you're having to appeal to is one oral tradition that carries them all.
Even with a written tradition, we can go back to the Lord of the Rings example, where there's several different pieces of media that you're going to find these undesigned coincidences in, and that's because it's different people telling the same story. And some of them were telling the story in very different ways.
But what you're doing is you're kind of telling a bedtime story here at this point. If you give me, some examples,
so are you when you explain why they're.
No, I'm not, because you're appealing to hypothetical. I could maybe find these if I tried and looked hard enough, maybe.
So are you. You had to invent a whole backstory for Philip.
No, I'm not inventing a backstory of Philip. I'm saying that it's well explained on the hypothesis that it's eyewitness testimony, versus it's made up and it just happens to fit.
Yeah, but like the whole like, oh well, Jesus turned to Philip because he knows that Philip is in the, like, there's nothing in the text that says that's why Jesus asked Philip.
That's exactly why it's an undesigned coincidence.
Yeah, but that's my point. You had to make that detail up and hypothesize that that's the detail that happened.
If it was explicitly said there, it wouldn't be an undesigned coincidence. It would just be explained. There'd be nothing there.
Or if they didn't think it was a big deal, it's just Jesus turned to Philip.
Right, exactly.
Like that's
because they thought it was they thought it wasn't a big deal that Jesus turned to Philip, and so he wrote it down.
and it's not a big deal, and it doesn't actually show that that's a true event, though.
Then in
It
another
just shows-
person, then in an earlier place, completely unrelated to the feeding of the 5,000, he mentions that he is from Bethsaida. And then in another completely unexplained place, he says that the feeding of the 5,000 in Luke, that it happened in Bethsaida. And then you have Mark yanking a guy out of Bethsaida who was a blind guy, healing him in 2 stages, which is kind of an interesting healing, and then telling the guy not to even go back into the town. And then you have Luke and Matthew recording Jesus without even saying anything about the feeding of the 5,000 in a completely unrelated place, going, "Woe to you, Bethsaida. If the miracles had been done in you that were done in these other places, you would have repented a long time ago in sackcloth and ashes."
Okay, but again, it's just different people telling the same story, though. Like I just don't
right,
see what the significance is.
None of the same story fits all of these particular details, and when you're making up fictions and you're forging stuff, they tend not to interlock.
Not always. No, they do.
Then show me.
Like I said,
demonstrate it.
Yeah,
Give
Lord of the
me
Rings.
Examples.
Lord of the Rings.
That's not that's not as specific.
That's a story that was made up.
Be specific.
I'm sorry, I don't
Give
have
me
the
a
entire
design.
text of the Lord of the Rings memorized to come up with an example on the spot.
Rhino,
But
come on. You're supposed to, in your oral tradition culture in Canada, have Lord of the Rings memorized by heart by now and to be able to recite it at any point. Come on. I'm just kidding. But no, you have to give specifics. You can't just say, well, maybe it's a fictional book and maybe they have them. No, I'm telling you,
I guarantee you can find undesigned coincidences.
Then I don't know, have one of your buddies, since you're a content creator, go, I want you to prove that stupid Erik, dishonest apologist guy wrong, and research this, and I will double all the money that is being given to charity right now if they find it. Like, I'm throwing the gauntlet down. Boys, find them. You know who's trying to parody the argument right now? My buddy Derek Lambert. I love the guy, but he's trying really hard to parody it, and he's going to these different scholars, and he's trying to. They what do? They find one example. So we're never saying that you wouldn't find one example.
So some dude is saying, why doesn't Lord of the Rings count? Yes, it does. So that's not what he's saying. He's not saying it doesn't count. He's saying that you're not going to find the same level of undesigned coincidences in amongst all the Lord of the Rings stuff as you would.
It's one author
in the Bible.
It's one story.
No, it's not one author. Peter Jackson and the screenwriter for that trilogy was a different author than J.R.R. Tolkien.
That's an adaptation, but okay,
yes, they're telling the same story. Exactly. That's my point.
Okay, so find them. Let's get them. Let's bring them out. Let's parody it. Like I was saying, my buddy Derek, love the guy, but he's doing a weird job right now trying to parody the argument, and he's not doing so well right now with it. When he can come and really parody the argument. My friend David Paulman has a video, How Skeptics Can Defeat Undesigned Coincidences. It's a channel. Oh geez, what the heck? He's gonna be mad at me. Faith Because Reason. People want to check it out. It's a skeptic's guide to defeating undesigned coincidences. They could say if they agree with this criteria or if they don't agree with this criteria, and then they can set out to disprove.
I'm not even. Like, sure, so are you saying that there will not be the same level as undesigned coincidences in all the Lord of the Rings things? Or are you kind of hedging there and saying, yeah, there would be, but just because it's all based on Tolkien's story?
No, I'm not really hedging. Well, it is all based on Tolkien's story, but...
Yes, just like all the Gospels were based on the oral tradition.
Okay, sure, fine. If you want to go for it. Find a bunch of them, you're...
I'm just wondering, like, if we can find this in the Lord of the Rings stories, what does that say about it? Does that say that it's a true story?
Go through the apocryphal Gospels and come up with the same argument. Do it. Go for it. Apocryphal Acts, books, different things like that. Go for it. Do it. Like, I'm waiting. Like,
so I forget which apocryphal gospel it is, but there's one that it's the only other book that we know of from antiquity that mentions the guards at the tomb. They mention they're Roman guards. The book of Matthew never mentions that they're Romans. It's just assumed from context that they're Romans.
That's not a
why not?
Otherwise,
that's just as good as the green grass example.
That's not as an otherwise surprising detail. Yeah, you could probably parry that.
It could have been temple guards. That's William Lane Craig has posited that they're temple guards.
Yeah,
but that's not generally accepted.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're right.
So that's an undesigned coincidence. He's showing that they're Roman guards, not the temple guards.
Okay, so find dozens of them because that could be a fluke, right? Find dozens of them, and then let's game on. That's fine. Like I'm trying to think of that particular story. It's not surprising that they would be Roman guards. Okay, let me give you an example. Like
it is surprising that they would be Roman guards this is William Lane Craig's whole point.
Let me grant something, right? Like I don't think every undesigned coincidence is very good. Like J. Warner Wallace, for example. I'm sure the audience they're real big fans of Detective Guy, but no, I think he's a fine guy. I just know
if Paul's still in the audience, he or no, it's Zod, not Paul, Zod.
Paul, like punching the air right now. But no, so he uses an example like with the story of Peter and the miraculous catch, right? And then it says, well, how come Mark doesn't explain the mending their nets and washing their nets? And well, that's well explained by the fact that there was this miraculous catch, and that's why they followed him. Of course, that's a boom. There you go, voila, you get an undesigned coincidence.
Or fixing the nets is something that fishermen do sometimes.
Well, I agree with you. So what I'm saying is, but the examples that I'm bringing forward, like say with the Herod servants, and maybe you don't like the green grass examples. I can give you a bunch from Acts. I can give you the green grass example. I can give you other examples.
It's not that I don't like that one. It's that's the one that I'm most familiar with.
Yeah, I think that's the one everybody's most familiar with. Okay, so I could give you other examples, but we're not really doing that. We're not getting into specifics. I'm saying they have these. I haven't given any examples. You're saying, well, hypothetically, the Lord of the Rings can have these, but I don't have examples. And so I'm saying, like, people want to see the examples, read the literature, make sure you understand it, go to the apocryphal gospels or other fictional religious stories and effectively parody the argument. I've issued this challenge. Derek Lambert is taking me up on it. I don't think he's doing a good job of responding to it yet. I'm not saying he couldn't.
Okay, but
if this argument can be proven wrong, then that's fine.
So I will look into that later. But like, I'm not Derek. I don't know what he's doing. So I like.
No, I know you're not. I'm
referencing him
as an example.
But I'm not familiar with that example.
Sure. He I don't know. Sometimes he watches stuff I'm in because we get along when we fight. We're like frenemies or something. I don't know. So
yeah, that was so. Anyway. Before we did this, I did ask a bunch of my content creator buddies. Because I like to vet people before just letting them on my channel, and everybody was like, he's a good dude. So,
okay.
So you have a good reputation among.
I have the apologia of seal of approval there, I guess. Yeah. I like Paul.
But yeah, no, like to take it back to the Roman guard example, like William Lane Craig points out that they are temple guards because it doesn't make sense that they go back to the Jewish leaders and when something goes wrong, and that they would accept a bribe from them to report something that for a Roman soldier would be the death penalty.
Right.
So like for him, it makes sense that they're temple guards, but then we have this undesigned coincidence confirming that they are Roman guards, like most apologists would agree.
I don't know if they would agree or not, but what I'm saying is one coincidence.
Craig is the only person that I've ever heard argue that they are not Roman guards.
I'm saying that, sure, you could find a stray thing here and there that does happen to interlock, just like I could open up a puzzle and just grab two pieces and get them to fit, but I can't do that with the whole puzzle.
If you have a hammer, you can.
And that's
kind of my point here, is that you are going back and making these things fit.
That these aren't convoluted. I'm not making these things fit. This is kind of like gaslighting almost. I'm not saying that's what you're intentionally doing, so don't misunderstand me. I'm not attributing ill intention whatsoever, but you're basically kind of doing the whole penguins from Madagascar thing, like you didn't see anything. And I'm saying,
but that's not what I'm not saying you didn't see it. I'm saying you're seeing it in a post hoc way, where like you're looking at it.
No, I don't think that I am seeing it in a post hoc way. I think Parallelomania sees things in like a post hoc way, because you can find parallels in nearly everything. I don't think you can find undesigned coincidences in just nearly anything. It doesn't work.
So I'm not familiar with the term parallelomania. I saw it's like.
Yeah, like, well, Jesus ascended into heaven. Well, so did Romulus. And so therefore,
okay, that's
the Gospels are stealing from Romulus. The stories about Romulus.
Yeah, so the whole third part of the movie Zeitgeist.
Kind of, which you'd be surprised. A lot of sophisticated. Don't be careful. You're going to offend some people, because there are a lot of people who think this is good argument, and
I'm not one of them. So I was back when I was a Christian. the movie Zeitgeist is actually a movie that kind of stopped me from falling down the conspiratorial rabbit hole. It's like some guy told me to watch it and I had respect for him, so I watched it with an open mind and I was like, yeah, okay, some of these things are kind of making sense or whatever. And then it got to the third part that was attacking my religion. It was like, okay, I'm going to look into the claims of this movie. And
yeah, you got to debunk it, you know.
So yeah, Zeitgeist is like the whole parallel thing is
well, people get more sophisticated with it just to
it depends on
give them some credit, but yeah, it gets
Zeitgeist
bad,
is a bad example of it. Like there are certainly like there are parallels that the Old Testament, especially Genesis, definitely shows signs of it being a story that evolved from the previous culture in the area, the Semitic cultures in the area.
Yeah, that's not my specialty with Old Testament there, but yeah, I understand. It's a post hoc kind of thing too. It's just post hoc ergo propter hoc, where basically you're like, it came before, therefore it must be the cause of.
Well, I mean, it fits in perfectly with what we know of the culture of the area at the time.
Yeah, again, I don't do the Old Testament stuff, so I don't know. Like if they borrowed it and just theologized it, I don't necessarily think that's what they did, but I don't.
I mean, the Leviathan story is a perfect mirror of the Asherah story, or I think it's Asherah. I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I've gone over this, but I've had a long conversation with Josh of Digital Hammurabi, who is an Assyriologist.
Yeah. No, Josh is smart. He's a nice guy. That's inspiring philosophy. Michael Jones is more the guy on that stuff. I just am more New Testament. So it's interesting. It's stuff I want to get into someday. Him and Josh talking would be cool. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I know they've kind of responded to each other in the past and it's been interesting and entertaining, but it's stuff that I don't know how to interpret because I'm just not an expert in Old Testament stuff. I'm not saying I'm even an expert in New Testament stuff.
And you're dismissing the opinions of the experts in the New Testament stuff.
No, I didn't. I said no. Hold up. I said Old
biblical.
Testament. I said Old Testament.
I know, but earlier you said the New Testament, like biblical scholarship, is a mess, and
that's right.
You disregard the opinion of when I appeal to the scholarly consensus about what things say in the New Testament, you dismiss that because you don't like that field.
I don't know. No, I didn't say I didn't know about New Testament. I've been studying New Testament issues for the past 10 years.
But when I have appealed to the scholarly consensus that suggests X, Y, or Z, I forget exactly what it was, you basically dismiss the entire field.
Yeah, that's right.
So you're dismissing the opinion of the experts there.
No, I don't dismiss their entire field, okay? But I will say I see huge problems with New Testament scholarship, epistemological problems. I'm not the only person to have noticed this.
The mythicists also notice that.
So what? Who cares?
I'm just saying
you want to equate me with QAnon and anti-vaxxers next? I mean, it's not the same thing. I'm sorry, but biblical scholarship is not a incremental scientific discipline that just only improves over time. This is literary criticism that shifts over and over. Q wasn't consensus. Now Q is a consensus. Q is moving out of being consensus. The gospel of Q, and all that other stuff. Like there are people who have challenged it. People challenge stuff in biblical scholarship all the time. Kip Davis is a guy who I've had on my channel. I love the guy. Super smart guy. Expert at Dead Sea Scrolls, like one of the top best, awesome guy. But he's told me himself, one time I saw him in a chat and he's like, hey, consensus is against that. I'm like, Kip, do you hold any views that are outside of biblical scholarly consensus? And he's like, yeah, I have to admit that I do. There I could think of like a dozen. The biblical scholarship isn't monolith. There are people, I'm sure Bart Ehrman holds positions that are outside of biblical scholarly consensus.
It's one thing for a historian to hold a outside of consensus opinion. It's something completely different for us layfolk. Like the best I have to go on is what the experts agree on.
I think if I have some basic training in like logic and philosophy and epistemology and different things like that, and then I look how they reason, and when I see discipline make a bunch of fallacious arguments, like consistently cherry picking to create developments, making arguments from silence, showing strong and strange bias against harmonization and different things like that in historical fields is a completely normal thing, then I can go, okay, that's weird. And so when somebody says, but consensus, it's my response to that is, well, if your entire discipline makes the same mistake in certain areas over and over and over again, it doesn't do me any good for you to say, yeah, but we all make that same mistake. You see what I'm saying?
What I'm getting at, though, is that as a layperson, I'm not a historian. I'm not an expert in that field. You're not a historian. You're not an expert in that field. So why does either of us have a leg to stand on to say, like, when the experts agree on this?
Because I can think, because I can reason, because I can observe.
Yeah, but they're literally the experts. Like, you just...
If you show me that you know what you're talking about, I don't care if you have credentials. If you have credentials and you show me that you don't know what you're talking about, I don't care about your credentials. I just don't. At least for that particular point that you're making, I don't. So when Paula Friedrichsen, super smart lady, biblical scholar, really smart person, but when she says that I think that the story of Stephen is an invention because, or at least Paul wasn't present when it happened.
Stephen the magician?
Stephen the martyr. Yeah, the Stephen the martyr who got stoned to death.
So not Stephen the magician.
No, not okay, Simon.
Different Steve. Simon. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. There's a lot of Simons. When she says, "Well, I think that's made up because Paul never mentions it. Why not?" Come on, that is such a terrible argument from silence. Okay, that's awful. I had Matthew Harkey, again, skeptical friend of mine, say, you know what, Eric, one of the things that I like about your channel, at least, even though we disagree about a lot of stuff, is he's like, Bart Ehrman comes up with some cockamamie crap contradictions that are just garbage. And just because he's a scholar doesn't mean that like he's in a privileged position to make poopy arguments, you know? And so like he's like, you're right about some of the things that he gets wrong.
I'm not saying that scholars are inerrant and they get everything right. I'm just saying that as a layperson, I'm not in a position to look at the documents myself and be like, oh, I can come up with a better opinion than these guys can, or a better conclusion than these guys can. Like,
well, I'm not the only person that is just because I'm not a scholar doesn't mean that there aren't scholars who agree with me. I'm not just sitting there like doing everything completely from my armchair.
But most of them don't. Like, not even the Christian ones agree with your undesigned coincidences.
I don't care. Well, first of all, you don't know that. Second of all, not a lot of people have even looked at undesigned coincidences or even given it much of a fair hearing
because it's not taken seriously. Like,
they don't ask.
Historians don't take it seriously.
Survey some scholars and ask them if they've even heard about it.
And the ones that don't take it seriously.
So, for example, Dale Allison does use a couple examples of what actually are undesigned coincidences in his scholarly works. He is a biblical scholar. Nobody in the audience is going to dispute that. But when he was asked, what are undesigned coincidences? What are your opinion of that? And he's like, huh? What? Because he hasn't even heard about it.
Because it's not a thing that historians use. It's a methodology. It's a methodology that was invented by
I even gave you an example of Jeffrey Tripp, a New Testament scholar who is trying to debunk undesigned coincidences, who found an actual undesigned coincidence and says, yeah, I think that this is a historical thing. Most of the people that I've talked to about this will at least admit, yes, undesigned coincidences could have evidential force. When I mentioned the one with Paul and the dudes coming from Macedonia and giving him money, you're like, huh. Yeah,
but that's not an undesigned coincidence, though. They're just
that's exactly what it is. That's what it is. You just. And I'm not saying every example is equally strong.
Yeah, but they were very obviously talking about the exact same thing there. Like it's not like just some random
talking about the same thing because it's based on actual true events.
Yeah, but it's not just some random reference to something that they had no reason to both be talking about. Like they were both.
So the author of Acts says absolutely nothing about them giving him a big offering. He just says that he started working full time or stopped working full time and preaching full time. And then Paul says nothing about him making tents. He does talk about working and stuff. He doesn't say anything about this particular event and all this other stuff. And then he just mentions that these people came down and gave him a bunch of money, which is it. And it ties together. And there are dozens of these, especially in Acts. If you don't buy the literary dependence, if you think literary dependence destroys undesigned coincidences, I would disagree with you. But then I could give you a bunch of them where between Acts and Paul's letters that don't have literary dependence and that are better explained on eyewitness testimony. So, maybe we're going in circles at this point, and maybe I hope we're not losing anybody. But yeah, I just
viewership's down about 20 viewers since
Okay. No, come back.
Everybody
Whoa,
donate
whoa.
to charity. We're at 3,900. We need $575 to get to
I
the goal
will
of the stream.
bash Gary Habermas again just for us, these poor people, to get what they need, because I have been in that position where I've been in need as well. So this is a great cause. I've noticed that appreciate you doing it.
I've noticed that the minimal facts have gone from 12 facts when he first started talking about it to 6.
There's like 3, yeah, yeah. No, I understand. Lacone only uses 3, so, but yeah. Anyway,
so donate to Project Share. I don't know how much more time you have. I generally stream for about 2 hours. I can probably go longer if you want to keep hashing this out.
Go another 15 minutes. I do have another thing that I got to do later today, so I probably need to rest in between. But I could go another 15.
Okay. All right. So we've got 15 minutes to raise $575.
No, we can do it. That's easy. It's easy. Let's have the miraculous catch here. Anyway, that's terrible. That was terrible. I'm sorry. I'm a dad. I make really bad dad jokes that don't even land half the time. So anyway,
I mean, I've got 4-year-olds that tell me I'm making stupid jokes.
It'll get only worse from here.
Yeah,
trust me.
Oh, my daughter's the worst because she will roll her eyes at me and complain about my bad jokes, but then she has the exact same sense of humor, so she'll turn right around and make her own dad jokes.
See, yeah, they become you after a while.
Oh,
and then you just call them out on it.
Whenever she does, I just lock eyes with her and don't say anything until she just looks at me and is like, "Shut up." But yeah, actually, I don't know. Maybe we can call it quits now because I'm not sure
where to go.
Yeah, no, like the conversation kind of petered out, and if we only have 15 minutes, I don't feel like we can start anything back up. But
oh, that's fine. I mean, we that's no problem either. I want to help you raise this money because, again, I think it's great.
Apparently, you summoned Kip Davis.
Oh no,
Kip Davis is in the chat. Am I late? What's happening?
Kip. Oh, Kip, I mentioned your name. I said you don't always agree with consensus, so I hope you're not mad at me about that. But that's what you told me. I think I'm pretty 99.9% sure. Yeah.
So the context you came up in, Kip, was that I was saying that as non-experts, we should probably stick to the consensus pretty closely, whereas like an expert would have more freedom to disagree because they are an expert. So they would know that they have a more intimate knowledge of the subject matter. And I just thought it was a bit weird that like when I appealed to the consensus, you would turn around and dismiss it, but then you still appeal to scholars.
I wasn't. Well, I appeal to some scholars. Yeah, that that if I feel like there's a point that they agree with me on, then I'll appeal to them. Like I'm making a video right now.
So do you not see how that comes across as rather cherry picky? Like if I find a scholar who agrees with the opinion I already have, I will use them. But I'm not. I'm going to ignore the ones that disagree.
Don't you do the same sometimes? I mean, you're not.
I try not to.
Bach. You're not quoting Richard Bauckham, are you? Well, he doesn't. He disagrees with you. Are you going to quote D.A. Carson? He disagrees with you. Are you going to quote Craig Blomberg? He disagrees with you.
So a bit of a confession type. So we are a bit outside of my. This is not a topic that I go into very much. So like. You probably have been. You're a bit more familiar with it than I am. I typically am responding.
So you're saying I'm an expert. That's what you're saying. So now I can have an opinion.
I am saying you are more. We're both lame.
Just kidding.
No, I'm saying my normal topic is evolution, and I deal with young Earth creationists. Just to confirm, you're not a young Earth creationist?
No. Go ahead.
Okay. So and yeah, but like so, anytime I'm looking into the scientific research, I go out of my way to make sure, like, if I find a paper or something that disagrees with a point that I'm making, I go out of my way to point that out and then find other research that explains. Like I don't just dismiss it and say, oh, they're wrong because I don't like that opinion.
No, well, I'm not dismissing it, but I'm saying that I'm looking at their arguments and I'm looking at the bad habits and I'm saying this is why I think that they're wrong, and I'm giving arguments. So what you have to do is you have to say you're wrong, not because of scholarly consensus. You're wrong because these are the reasons.
Yeah,
right?
and I will go into the scholarship. I won't just...
Yes, and you do with your evolution stuff, and that's fine, and that's good, or whatever. But I'm saying I don't think biblical scholarship is on the same.
Okay.
It's not an incremental scientific discipline.
Kip has chimed in. Kip has said,
Yes.
correct, I hold a good number of non-consensus opinions, but unlike Erik, I deeply understand the reason why I reject consensus. Sorry, Erik.
Hey.
Oh, shit.
Kip, Hey, Kip, if you ever, I'm throwing this out there, and this is weird, and I hope you don't mind me doing this. But if you ever wanted to discuss either with me or maybe David Paulman, the guy who does Faith Because of Reason, I saw you did a community post on Undesigned coincidences. That might be really fun and could be cool. So you know how to get a hold of me. Let me know.
Yeah.
And we could do that whoever's channel. I don't care.
Yeah. So, yeah, basically, I understand that the study of history is a different type of discipline than the study of evolution. But like there is some parallel there. Like if I am looking into, like anytime I have done a video on the reliability of the Gospels, I do try to say like, and this is how an apologist typically responds to that. And I do my best to make sure I'm not presenting a straw man version. I'm presenting the strongest case of that, and then explaining why I don't feel that that's adequate. Or sometimes I even agree that like, no, I'm perfectly willing to accept the apologetic here. It makes sense. And I don't see the point in fighting against that.
Well, I try to do the same. I listen to other people. I listen to people that disagree with me.
Yeah, but that's
probably more often than I.
But like when a scholar disagrees with my position on the subject matter that they are an expert in, I'm going to sit down and listen. Like I'm not like if I'm going to disagree, I'm going to want to find another scholar disagreeing and explaining why they disagree specifically.
Sure.
And if I can't find that, then I rethink my position.
If I see somebody like Bart Ehrman cherry picking to create a development, or if I see Paula Friedrichsen using a really bad argument from silence, I'm perfectly within my within reason and within right to say that's bad.
So it's worth mentioning that an argument from silence is not always something that you shouldn't use. Like there are some things
talking about
that's
a weak
like
argument from silence. I'm not talking about a strong argument from silence. Those exist, but when I make a weak argument from silence, and as a discipline, I see this as a bad habit, then it's okay for me to go, this is messed up. When philosophers, like I said, like Peter Van Inwagen or the McGrews, which I know people don't like the McGrews in the audience, like, yeah, McGrews. When they're epistemologists and they understand how logic and reason and evidence work, and they go, whoa, like I'm looking at the way you guys are doing, say, like redaction criticism, and a lot of this is just like fundamentally flawed and unsound. I don't think that's the same thing as somebody being like, whoa, I'm doing my own research and vaccines are bad. I don't think that that's the equation here. Or I'm doing my own research and therefore,
and there, so
the Earth is 6,000 years old.
There were some people that accused you of that in the chat, saying you were sounding like a flat earther. But I do.
The Earth is flat, though.
Potential theism says boo McGrews. It depends what scale we're measuring on. But yeah, no, no,
I'm kidding. The Earth isn't flat. Just in case people know, I'm joking. I get people in the comments every now and then. It's
if
wild.
We're measuring on the scale of like how big the galaxy is, the Earth is essentially flat.
Yeah, sure. There we go.
So it's all about perspective.
How you look at
it. No, I do want to acknowledge that there is a difference between the study of history and the harder sciences.
There is.
But that doesn't mean that like we should be able to just like disregard what the experts are saying about it. And every time I've read an expert weighing in on the undesigned coincidences argument, it's always come back to that's not a good argument. Well, it's just
I've noted that a few people actually sort of use it. They might not follow the conclusion.
This might have been because of the nature of the discussion, but like I don't think you gave an example, and I like not just a name of someone using it, but like a specific example.
Yeah, sure. So I have a slide in a presentation I do, and since we're running out of time, I don't have like the document right in front of me right now, but I do have a document where 10 historians have actually used that. Some of them have even called it by name, by the way. I can think of biblical scholars who have used it. Matthew Hartke cited one in our Conversation on Potential Theism's channel, and he admitted like that's a solid example. I have to give that. Again, they didn't use it by name, but it's still the same principle. So it's the same thing. They're saying that this looks like a historical fact based on this particular way of reasoning. And so, no, I think it's totally fine. I think Lydia McGrew on her own channel has given several examples from just completely secular history of things that interlock and that are undesigned coincidences, and people can go, and she's doing a whole series on that, and they can check that out. So if those work in a secular context, why wouldn't they work in a historical context? And so, and I'm just saying that the magnitude of them, again, points to eyewitness testimony, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean, like,
okay, we're just going to go in another circle if I start this again.
Round and around and around we go. Yeah, so no, it's fine. I get it, man. I think in one sense I kind of understand, because the Gospels, they have miracles in them, and that's weird, right? And that's not why you're dismissing it entirely. And I understand that you're making that point.
There is something to be said for the fact that in the study of history, the miraculous accounts are pretty much just by default excluded, and like not just speaking biblically, but like when we're looking at Tacitus writing, we don't consider his account of the Emperor Vespasian healing a guy's hand to be historically accurate, because that's not how things work.
Well, I wouldn't say that's not how things work, but I think we can use some common sense, and we can go, okay, well, Vespasian had aspirations to be emperor. He was in Alexandria. The local god was the god Serapis. He picked two guys out of a crowd, and he had everything to gain. And so when you compare that to, say, the claims of the apostles, they have everything to lose.
Tacitus says flat out in the text that the guy he's interviewing is a witness who has nothing to lose from, it has nothing to gain from lying about it.
Tacitus says that he doesn't believe it, though. I mean, if I'm remembering correctly.
He does,
and so, but there's other historians who record the same event. In fact, that's one of the undesigned coincidences that Jeffrey Tripp gave that just tells me that, yeah, that's right. That's where what's his name was at that particular time, Vespasian in Alexandria in the spring. And so, yeah, it's not, the context is different. Okay, it's not just about the content of the claims.
I don't really think it's that different. I don't really think it's that different, though. I use Tacitus as the example because that's the one I'm most familiar with, because that's one that happened around the same time.
So Peter telling a bunch of people that a crucified Messiah pretender is actually really the Messiah is the same thing as a Roman emperor, doing some Todd Bentley routine.
No, this is what I was getting to, is that there are examples of miracles that are recorded in historical documents where there's talking about miracles as if they happened.
Yeah, sure.
But historians disregard that, because history is a study of probabilities, and a miracle will always be less probable than either someone is lying, someone is mistaken, someone was tricked by a magic trick or something like that.
No, I don't think it's always that's the case. I don't think that's true at all. I think that enough evidence, testimonial evidence, can overcome a low prior. But I agree.
I don't think it can, though, because we talked about the miracle of the sun in the Catholic Church earlier. Neither of us accept that, but there was a lot of testimonial evidence.
I don't reject all Catholic miracles.
So you believe the Virgin Mary appeared to those people?
No, not in Fatima.
So okay, so but that has much better attestation than any of the miracles of the Bible.
No, it doesn't.
You can look at video of interviews of eyewitnesses to the event. That is way better than anything the Bible has.
I think if you had video of the there's videos of people being miraculously healed in Protestant circles. You don't believe those either.
No, I'm talking about
video doesn't make it better.
I'm not talking about a video of the event. There is no video of the event that I'm aware of.
I've seen the pictures. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I've seen them.
No, I'm talking about a video.
I've looked at Mary now.
I'm talking about video interviews of eyewitnesses to the event. So you're telling me that the Bible was written either by eyewitnesses or people that interviewed the eyewitnesses. I'm telling you there is a video of an actual eyewitness interview where we don't need to speculate about whether or not they're an eyewitness.
Sure.
It just is an eyewitness.
Does it confirm beliefs that they already had, or is there any sort of context of persecution for bringing such stories forward? What did they see? Do we have specific details of what they saw?
We do.
Was it a highly detailed claim, or
yes,
is it something
very highly detailed?
I'm aware of what Fatima is.
Yeah, no,
and the reason why I don't believe Fatima is because it's possible that there are some natural explanations. If you want a better Marian apparition, the stuff that in Zaytun is, I don't have an explanation for Zaytun. I don't know what it is.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, okay. It's a Coptic church that allegedly a light of a woman figure appeared for days and days and days and days and days. The one that I think is the most interesting is Lourdes, because people have literally physically been healed at Lourdes.
Yeah, but there's also a lot of people that got like dysentery from drinking the water there. So it seems, it seems weird that the healing water would give people dysentery.
Well, this isn't the lady who drank, the person that I'm thinking of. She didn't drink the water or anything else like that, but she had a back brace. She had morphine injections. She was in this condition for a really long time. She was getting worse and worse. She was basically crippled. She went to Lourdes. She came home. She felt worse. She felt like she needed to go to the chapel and pray. She heard an inner voice. She took off her brace. She walked up straight. Her dropped foot was returned to normal. She had no morphine withdrawals. And the church assigned like dozens and dozens of doctors at her case. And after a long period of time, declared that there is no medical explanation. So I have to, even though that bristles against my Protestant theology, I accept that.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the details of that one to comment on it.
It was on 60 Minutes. It was her name was Bernadette Moreau. Yeah. So people can look that up. It's on YouTube, Bernadette Moreau. And I think there are other medically unexplained situations that are like this, that if these things are still happening today.
I've never encountered an actual documented miracle that is documented to the degree that would be required to demonstrate anything miraculous.
Well, here's another one. So then we can wrap up if we need to. There's a guy by the name of Greg Spencer. He had juvenile macular degeneration. He was a police officer.
Is this the guy that? Is this the one that they did a case study on?
Who?
The guy that you're using as an example, because I know there is one example of someone that had macular degeneration that they did a case study on. When you actually look into the details, they went.
No, this guy, well, I'll tell you the story and then you can let me know if it rings a bell to you. But so he had juvenile macular degeneration. He was a police officer. He saw a lot of horrible things. He quit his job as a police officer to become a truck driver. Shortly after that, the macular degeneration developed. He was to the point he had to be put on disability because he could no longer drive his truck. He spent a few years on disability. He went to a retreat with his wife. He prayed for cleansing in his mind because he was being bombarded with like PTSD. He opened his eyes from that particular prayer. Suddenly he noticed he could see everything. He was reading license plate numbers on the way home and different things like that. And they had to investigate him because, like, dude, you said you were blind and now you're not, and you were receiving disability. But all the medical documentation proved that no, he was in fact blind and now he could see. So he had to go back to work. He no longer receives disability. There are other cases that are like that. These are just a few. And so to me, prima facie, like, this makes me think like, well, the text of the Bible isn't really all that unbelievable, you know? So
okay. So that one, I don't know. There's a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. So maybe that's a different version of the same story. Again, but
no, it's Greg Spencer. You could look him up. He's got a story, I think, on YouTube. He's in different books. He does have medical documentation too, by the way. Yeah,
but this is where this is what I'm getting at, is that like the story that I'm familiar with regarding macular degeneration was someone where it was a similar thing. Their eyes degenerated, became legally blind, and then after prayer they were healed and could see again, and there were medical documents backing it up. But when you actually look into the medical documents, they weren't actually healed. They went from being legally blind without glasses to having like 2400 vision with glasses over a span of 20 years.
Oh no, this guy has 20/30 vision. Yeah, okay, 20/30 vision now.
So possibly a different guy then, but
Yeah,
like
definitely a different
this
guy.
is the kind of thing that I've seen. Like anytime there has been a miracle that has documentation that people bring out, and like the one that I just cited, that was on what's his face? I'm blanking on his name. No, the McDowell.
McDowell?
Josh McDowell, not Sean McDowell. The younger McDowell.
Sean, yeah.
He brought it out as one of the best examples of a documented miracle that we have.
And that's pretty bad. I mean, I don't know.
I'd have to, shocking to me how bad it was.
I'd have to look at that. No, I mean, I've also interviewed another guy. He was a truck driver. Well, no, not a truck driver, a truck mechanic. He was called in late one time. He was working on a logging truck. He's in Wisconsin. His name's Bruce Van Natta. People can look this up. The truck, the jack gave way. The truck fell on him, basically pancaked him to the floor, bloodshot, out of his mouth. And so... I'll wrap it up. I'm sorry.
My kids just got home from school. So
no, I totally
forgot that today was an early day.
Yeah. Just bloodshot out of his mouth. He's the only person to have survived such injuries. That's miraculous in and of itself. But the fact is that they had to remove 80 to 90% of his intestines. I forget the exact percentage, but he had his intestines removed. He was in the hospital for a pretty good period of time. He couldn't eat at all. He was on drip feeding. He wasted down from 185 pounds, I believe, to like 125 pounds. He was basically starving to death. A friend of his heard a voice tell him to come and pray for him. So he flew from New York to Wisconsin. Bruce said that when the guy prayed for him, he felt like electricity go into his body. He began to be able to eat food normally. He wasn't vomiting or anything else like that. And the more interesting part is that through all the Doppler, and you can't cut a guy open and measure his intestines, but from all the Doppler and the x-rays and everything else, he has his intestines grew actually back, not 100%, but definitely not to the whatever low percent that he was, but to a level where he can actually digest food and all this other stuff. There's your God healing an amputee there. And I mean, there's other examples. I know people who were healed from gastroparesis, paralyzed stomachs, multiple sclerosis, different things like that.
I think the gastroparesis one is another one that Sean brought up in his video. So I probably have that video. I don't remember the name. It was ages ago. But I probably already have a video talking about that one.
Right on.
So anyway, I've bookmarked this part of the stream. That's another thing that I'm going to get a video out of. You are welcome to also make videos out of the stream.
Yeah, sure. And people are welcome to check out. I have a presentation where I go through several documented cases. There's also an acquaintance of mine, Caleb Jackson, who's on Capturing Christianity, who goes through some solid documented cases. And then there's also a debate that Josh something or other and Craig Keener, I forget the guy's name, Josh Brown, had a debate on the Unbelievable podcast with some cases as well that are worth looking into if people are interested. Maybe they're not. Maybe they think this stuff is stupid or too spooky or too weird. I understand.
Okay, so if you want to give your channel one last shout out.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me on. I mean, I'm sorry if I was interruptive at all. I really apologize for that. I'm so sorry. But no, it's Testify Apologetics. People feel free to watch. Give me weird comments if they want, and hear another side.
As to the interrupting, it was a spirited discussion. I didn't feel like there was too much interrupting going on.
Okay, good.
Some people in the chat might disagree, but I don't know. I interrupted you when I felt like you were going somewhere unnecessary.
That's fine.
I'm sure you did the same to me.
Nobody was offended, I don't think so.
But yeah, it's been a good chat, I think. I'm getting a couple of videos out of it. I hope you maybe get a couple of videos out of it as well. We can have a video back and forth. We still need we're at 4116. I thought we were still at 4016. So we still need $384. And
maybe
I know
come in afterwards.
I know it drives some people nuts that it's not an even dollar amount right now. It's 4116 and 66 cents. So get the OCD crowd unite. Fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to get a round number. 0 would be the best round number.
Yeah, make it 5,000.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. Down the goal. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Not 0.
Oh wait, I said 500. I meant 900 or 800 Damn.
Zero left needed, right? That's what we
Yeah.
need.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I consider this a success. So yeah, thanks so much for joining me, and have a good one. I don't know. I haven't really thought of a sign off for this, but I have credits,
Yeah.
so bye.